The stagecoach wheels crunched through the frozen mud as it crested the final hill. Eleanor Mitchell pressed her gloved hands against the window, breath fogging the glass as she caught her first glimpse of Silver Creek. Her heart stopped. Where a bustling mining town should have stood, only blackened timbers and collapsed buildings remained, like broken teeth against the Montana sky. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. There must be some mistake, she whispered, clutching the letter from Thomas Wilkins, her fiancé of 3 months by correspondence, whom she'd never met. The driver pulled the horses to a halt, his face grim in the fading light. "No mistake, ma'am. God help us." Eleanor stepped down from the coach, her boots sinking into half-frozen earth, the wind whipping her hair loose from its careful arrangement. The driver unloaded her trunks with uncomfortable haste. "I can't stay, miss. Nightfall's coming, and whatever happened here—" He shook his head, already turning the team around. "Wait!" Eleanor called. "You can't just leave me here." But the stagecoach was already rolling away, dust swirling behind it as Eleanor stood alone among her worldly possessions, facing the ruins of what should have been her new life. That's when she saw him, a figure moving through the shadows of a collapsed building, rifle raised. Eleanor froze, her breath visible in the chill air between them. Eleanor had left everything behind in Boston, her teaching position, her small apartment, the pitying looks from friends who whispered spinster when they thought she couldn't hear. Thomas Wilkins' letters had promised a new beginning, a thriving store in a prosperous mining town, a comfortable home, and a man who valued her education and independent spirit. His final letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, just before she boarded the train west. "Silver Creek awaits you, as do I." Now she stood among the ruins, watching the armed stranger approach with measured steps. "State your business," he called, voice rough like he hadn't used it in days. His beard was untrimmed, clothes smudged with soot, but his eyes remained sharp, assessing. Eleanor squared her shoulders. "I'm Eleanor Mitchell. I've come to marry Thomas Wilkins." The rifle lowered slightly. Something flashed across the man's weathered face, recognition, followed by what might have been pity. "Thomas Wilkins is dead." 4 words that collapsed her future as thoroughly as the charred buildings surrounding them. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of ash and coming snow. Eleanor fought to keep her voice steady. "What happened here?" "Raiders!" He gestured with his rifle toward the destroyed town. "Came for the mine payroll, took everything, killed anyone who stood in their way. That was 8 days ago. 8 days. Eleanor had been on the train then, gazing out windows, imagining her future while Thomas and the entire town. "Is anyone else alive?" she managed. The man hesitated. "Few folks were out hunting or working claims. Some got away." His eyes scanned the horizon. "It'll be dark soon. Not safe here." Eleanor glanced at her trunks, ridiculous now, filled with dresses for a life that no longer existed. "Where should I go? The next town is 2 days' ride." "You can't stay here." He looked at her properly for the first time, taking in her city clothes, her impractical boots. "Raiders might come back. They often do." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The man muttered a curse, then sighed. "Name's Nathan Cooper. I was the blacksmith." He shouldered his rifle. "I've got shelter, not much, but it's hidden. You can stay tonight, then I'll get you to Juniper Ridge tomorrow." Eleanor looked back at the ruins of Silver Creek, at the collapsed building that might have been Thomas Wilkins' store, where she might have lived as a wife, instead of standing here, alone with a stranger. "My trunks? Take what you need for the night, 1 small bag." Nathan was already scanning the tree line. "We need to move. Storm's coming and we're exposed here." Eleanor opened the smallest trunk with trembling fingers. She grabbed a nightgown, a change of clothes, her mother's locket. Practicality overtook sentimentality as she added matches, a small knife hidden in her boot, the map she'd marked with such optimism. "Ready," she said, closing the bag. Nathan nodded once. "Follow me. Step where I step." They moved away from the road, skirting the edge of town. Eleanor caught glimpses of scenes too horrible to dwell on. A child's doll in the dirt, doors torn from hinges, dark stains she refused to identify. Nathan led her through a narrow path in the pines, up a rocky incline that made her lungs burn. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, they reached a small clearing. The shelter was barely visible. A mine office half collapsed into the hillside, its entrance obscured by brush and fallen trees that seemed too deliberately placed. "In here," Nathan said, moving aside a branch barrier. The interior was sparse, but functional. A small stove with a carefully vented pipe, a narrow cot, crates serving as both storage and furniture. A single lantern cast shadows across walls papered with maps. "You've been living here since?" Eleanor couldn't finish. "Since they came, yes." Nathan busied himself lighting the stove. "I was up at Eagle's Peak checking a claim when I saw the smoke. By the time I got back..." His voice trailed off. Eleanor set her bag down carefully. "I'm sorry about your town. Not my town anymore." He pointed to the cot. "You can take that. I'll keep watch." The small space felt suddenly awkward. A man and woman alone, the conventions of proper society blown away like ash in the wind. Eleanor straightened her spine. Society's rules seemed meaningless now, with Silver Creek in ruins. "Are you alone up here, Mr. Cooper?" "Nathan," he corrected, checking his rifle before settling on a crate near the door. "And no, there's someone else." From behind a canvas partition emerged an elderly woman, her silver hair in a loose braid, eyes bright despite the deep lines of her face. "I thought I heard voices," she said, her gaze fixing on Eleanor with curiosity. "Well now, aren't you a sight?" "Mabel, this is Miss Mitchell," Nathan said. "She came to marry Thomas." Understanding softened Mabel's expression. "Oh, child, I'm sorry you've come all this way for such sorrow." Eleanor felt tears threatening for the first time, not for Thomas, a man she'd known only through carefully worded letters, but for the kindness in this woman's weathered face. "Mabel Whitaker," the older woman continued, taking Eleanor's cold hands in her warm, papery ones. "I was the midwife here. Now I'm just an old woman Nathan won't leave behind." "She knows every plant that can heal or harm for 50 miles, Nathan said, something like respect warming his voice. "And she's stubborn as a mule," Mabel cackled. "Pot calling the kettle, boy." She turned back to Eleanor. "You must be frozen through. Let's get some tea in you." The storm arrived as night fell, wind howling through the pines, sleet rattling against the remaining windows. Eleanor sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, a tin cup warming her hands as Mabel tended to Nathan's shoulder, a wound he hadn't mentioned. "Raiders got a piece of him," Mabel explained, applying a pungent salve. "He carried me up this mountain with a bullet in him, if you can believe it." Nathan winced. "It just grazed me." "Men," Mabel said with a dismissive snort, "always minimizing." Eleanor watched them, this odd pair of survivors. How many others escaped? "Maybe 20, Nathan said, rolling his shoulder as Mabel finished. "Most headed for Juniper Ridge, some scattered to homesteads. Others..." He stared into the flames visible through the stove grate. "Some went after the raiders." "Fools," Mabel muttered. "Vengeance is a hungry beast that's never satisfied." Eleanor sipped her tea, bitter herbs with a hint of honey. "How did you survive?" Nathan's eyes met hers, dark with memories she couldn't read. "Luck, and hearing them before they saw me." The raiders. They were looking for something specific, Eleanor asked. The mine payroll, Nathan confirmed. But they didn't just take and leave. He trailed off. They enjoyed it, Mabel finished, her voice hard. Led by a devil named Jedediah Rawlins. He's built himself a small army, targeting mining towns up and down the territory. Thunder cracked overhead, and Eleanor jumped. The name felt like a curse in the small room. Tomorrow I'll get you to Juniper Ridge, Nathan said, changing the subject. Stage comes through there every week. You can head back east. Eleanor stared into her cup. Return to Boston? To what? She'd sold everything, burned bridges, told everyone who would listen that she was starting fresh in Montana territory. Pride warred with practicality. I have nowhere to go back to, she admitted. Mabel clicked her tongue sympathetically. Tomorrow's. Problems can wait for tomorrow's light. She patted Eleanor's knee. For now, you're safe here. Safe was a relative term, Eleanor thought, as she lay awake on the narrow cot, listening to the storm rage and Nathan's quiet movements as he kept, "Watch by the door." Her mind spun with the day's revelations, with grief for a future that had died before it began. She must have slept, because she woke to Nathan shaking her shoulder, his hand over her mouth. "Quiet," he whispered, removing his hand once her, eyes focused. "Someone's out there." Eleanor's heart hammered as she sat up. Mabel was already awake, a shotgun across her lap, her expression calm but alert. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nathan motioned them back as he peered through a narrow gap in the planked window. Dawn was just breaking, grey light filtering through the trees. The storm had passed, leaving everything coated in frost that sparkled dangerously. 4 riders, he murmured, moving slow, checking the ground. Raiders, Eleanor whispered. Scouts, Nathan corrected, looking for survivors or anyone who might have seen something. Mabel's hands tightened on the shotgun. They find us, we won't stand a chance. Eleanor moved to the window, ignoring Nathan's warning glance. She needed to see these men who had destroyed so many lives. Through the gap, she spotted them, hard-faced men with rifles across their saddles, scanning the trees methodically. The leader was younger than she expected, with a shock of red hair beneath his hat. "That's not Rawlins," Nathan murmured. "That's his second, McClintock, mean as a snake and twice as quick." One of the riders pointed toward the hill where they were hidden. Eleanor's breath caught. "They've found our trail," Nathan said, checking his rifle. "The frost shows everything." "We need to run," Mabel said, surprisingly spry as she gathered a small pack. Nathan shook his head. "They'd catch us in the open. We need to split up." He turned to Eleanor. "You take Mabel through the back tunnel. It leads to a cave system. Follow the blue marks I painted. They'll lead you to Eagle's Peak." "What about you?" Eleanor asked, already knowing the answer. "I'll lead them away." His expression left no room for argument. "Go east from Eagle's Peak. You'll hit the river. Follow it north to Juniper Ridge." Eleanor wanted to protest, but Mabel was already pulling her toward a narrow opening behind. The canvas partition. "Don't be foolish, girl. Nathan knows these mountains better than anyone." Nathan handed Eleanor his pistol. 6 shots. Don't use them unless you have to. Their eyes met, a moment of connection between strangers thrown together by tragedy. "We'll wait for you at Eagle's Peak," Eleanor said firmly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'll find you." The tunnel was tight and low, forcing them to crawl in places. Eleanor went first, pushing their small packs ahead, Mabel following with remarkable determination for a woman her age. Behind them, they heard shouts, then the crack of rifle fire. "Keep moving," Mabel urged when Eleanor hesitated. "He knows what he's doing." The tunnel opened into a larger cave where they could finally stand. Eleanor's eyes adjusted to the gloom, making out the blue marks Nathan had painted on the rock wall. She helped Mabel over the uneven ground, following the markers through twisting passages. Nathan maintained the old mining tunnels, Mabel explained between labored breaths. Said they might be needed someday. People thought him paranoid. More gunfire echoed, distant now. Eleanor tried not to think about Nathan facing 4 armed men alone. "How much farther?" she asked, supporting Mabel over a rocky section. "Not far to the exit. Then it's a climb to Eagle's Peak." Mabel's voice was strained. "I may slow you down, child." "We stay together," Eleanor said firmly, channeling the tone she'd used with reluctant students. "Nathan will find us." The cave exit was hidden behind a fall of rock, emerging into a stand of pines. The morning air felt shockingly fresh after the musty tunnels. Eagle's Peak loomed above them, rocky and exposed. "We need to keep under cover as much as possible," Eleanor said, scanning for the path Nathan had described. They moved slowly, Mabel leaning heavily on Eleanor at times, stopping often to rest. The mountain terrain was beautiful, but unforgiving. Loose shale, twisted roots, fallen trees. By midday, they'd made it halfway up the slope to Eagle's Peak, finding shelter in a rocky overhang. "Rest," Eleanor told Mabel, whose face had gone grey with exhaustion. "I'll keep watch." From their vantage point, she could see the valley. Below, the ruins of Silver Creek in the distance, thin wisps of smoke still rising from the devastation. There was no sign of riders or Nathan. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Eleanor tried to organize her thoughts. If Nathan didn't come, she would need to get Mabel to Juniper Ridge alone. The river Nathan mentioned was visible to the east, a silver thread cutting through the landscape. Following it north looked possible, but would mean traversing exposed terrain. "What brought you out here, child?" Mabel asked softly, breaking into her thoughts. Eleanor sighed. "A promise of something new, something that was mine." Mabel nodded knowingly. "Most come west for what they're running to, some for what they're running from." "Both, perhaps," Eleanor admitted. "I was tired of being pitied, of being told I should be grateful for crumbs of a life. And Thomas's letters promised more. They promised respect, partnership." Eleanor smiled ruefully. "Or so I thought." "Thomas was a good man," Mabel said. "Ambitious, but fair. He would have made a decent husband." The past tense hung between them, a reminder of all that had been lost. Eleanor was surprised to feel grief for a man she'd never met, for the life they might have built. A sound from below snapped her attention back to the present. Movement in the trees, a single figure working his way upward. Eleanor reached for the pistol, heart racing. "It's Nathan," Mabel said, her eyes sharper than Eleanor had given her credit for. "I'd know that stubborn walk anywhere." Relief flooded through Eleanor as she confirmed Mabel was right. She moved down the slope to meet him, noting his limping gait and the fresh blood staining his shirt sleeve. "You're hurt," she said as they met. "I'm alive," he countered. "The raiders. Lost them in the old north shaft. Collapsed it behind. Me." He glanced up at their shelter. "Mabel." "Resting. She's stronger than she looks." Nathan nodded, some tension leaving his shoulders. "We need to keep moving. Those scouts will report back to Rawlins. He doesn't like loose ends." "You need tending first," Eleanor insisted, gesturing to his arm. "Later, Eagle's Peak isn't safe enough." He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing beyond the city clothes and proper speech. "You did well, getting Mabel this far." The unexpected praise warmed something in Eleanor. "I was a teacher. Managing difficult journeys was part of the job." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Teaching might be the harder task." They climbed back to Mabel, who fussed over Nathan's wounds despite his protests. Eleanor watched their interaction, the easy familiarity of people who had known each other through better days. "Here," Mabel finally said, applying the last of her salve to Nathan's arm. "That should hold you, stubborn man." "We should reach the ridge by nightfall," Nathan said, already scanning their path ahead. "There's an old trapper's cabin we can use." "Is nowhere safe?" Eleanor asked. Nathan's eyes met hers, hard with truth. "Not until Rawlins is dealt with. He doesn't leave witnesses." "Then we keep moving," Eleanor said, helping Mabel to her feet. "One step at a time." They traveled in silence, Nathan leading, Eleanor supporting Mabel when needed, all of them alert to every snapping twig or rustling leaf. The forest felt alive with unseen threats, the beauty of the wilderness now ominous rather than awe-inspiring. As they crested a ridge, Nathan suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He dropped to a crouch, motioning them to do the same. "What is it?" Eleanor whispered. "Riders," he murmured. "In the valley below. Too many for scouts." Eleanor peered through the trees. Her breath caught as she counted at least 15 men, on horseback, moving with purpose toward the ruins of Silver Creek. "Rawlins," Mabel breathed, her weathered face pale. Nathan's expression hardened. "He's come to make sure the job is finished." Eleanor watched the distant figures, realizing with a chill that these were the men who had destroyed Silver Creek, who had killed Thomas and countless others, who would kill them without hesitation if discovered. "We need to warn Juniper Ridge," she said suddenly. "If they've finished with Silver Creek, they'll look for other targets," Nathan finished, a new urgency in his voice. "You're right. But we're still a day's journey from Juniper Ridge, even pushing hard." Mabel squeezed Eleanor's hand. "You two go, I'll slow you down." "No," Nathan and Eleanor said simultaneously. "We stay together," Eleanor added firmly. Nathan nodded, his eyes meeting Eleanor's with something like respect. "We'll find another way." As they watched, the riders reached the ruins of Silver, Greek and spread out, methodically checking buildings. Even from this distance, the deliberate nature of their search was evident. "They're looking for survivors," Nathan said grimly, "or evidence." "Evidence of what?" Eleanor asked. "Of who might have seen them?" He shouldered his rifle. "Come on, we need to move while they're occupied." They skirted the ridge, keeping to dense cover, making for the trapper's cabin Nathan had mentioned. The day wore on, the autumn sun slanting through the trees, casting long shadows that made every boulder and stump look momentarily threatening. Eleanor's city-bred muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to complain. She thought of the women she'd known in Boston, with their corseted waists and delicate constitutions, and almost laughed. One day in Montana, territory had changed her more than years in drawing rooms. The trapper's cabin appeared as the light began to fade, little more than a one-room structure of rough-hewn logs, its roof partially caved in. But it offered walls and cover, which felt like luxury after hours of exposure. "It's not much," Nathan said, checking the interior before allowing them entry. "It's perfect," Eleanor replied, helping Mabel inside. The cabin contained a rusted stove, a broken table, and little else. Nathan quickly set about gathering wood, while Eleanor helped Mabel settle on their spread blankets. "You're doing well with him," Mabel said quietly, nodding toward Nathan as he worked outside. "What do you mean?" "He doesn't trust easily, lost too much." Mabel adjusted her position with a wince. "But he respects capability, and you've shown plenty." Eleanor considered the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she'd been on a train, imagining a neat house and a proper marriage. Now she was in a collapsing cabin, fleeing killers with a wounded blacksmith and an elderly midwife. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "None of us do," Mabel said with surprising gentleness. We just keep putting one foot ahead of the other until we find solid ground again. Nathan returned with an armful of wood, his movements efficient as he built a small, nearly smokeless fire in the stove. Night fell quickly in the mountains, darkness spreading like ink between the trees. They ate a sparse meal of jerky and hard biscuits from Nathan's pack, washing it down with water from a nearby spring. The cabin grew marginally warmer, though drafts still found their way through gaps in the walls. "I'll take first watch," Nathan said, positioning himself near the single window. "You both should rest." Eleanor knew she should sleep, but her mind raced with the day's events, with plans and fears and possibilities. She found herself sitting beside Nathan, watching the moon rise over the distant peaks. "Do you think anyone else made it out?" she asked softly, mindful of Mabel sleeping nearby. Nathan's profile was sharp in the moonlight. "Some. The pastor and his wife were visiting a sick child outside town. The Brennan family was at their claim upriver. But most weren't so fortunate." "No." His voice was flat. "Most weren't." Eleanor studied him. This man who had saved her life, who was still saving it. "You knew Thomas, my intended." Nathan nodded. He was fair in his dealings, ambitious, had plans to expand the store, maybe open another in Juniper Ridge. "He wrote about that," Eleanor said, remembering the letters she'd left behind in her abandoned trunks. "He seemed kind." "He was." Nathan hesitated. "He mentioned you, said he was fortunate to have found a woman of education and spirit." The words brought an unexpected ache. "We never met, just letters." "Sometimes letters show more truth than faces," Nathan said. "People put their real selves on paper when they're not busy performing." The observation surprised her, revealing a depth to the blacksmith she hadn't expected. "Is that what we're doing now? Performing?" His eyes met hers, startlingly direct. "No, Miss Mitchell, I think we're past that luxury." The honesty of the moment hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Eleanor felt something shift, a connection, forming not of choice or convenience, but of shared survival. "Get some rest," Nathan said finally, turning back to the window. "Tomorrow will be harder." Eleanor returned to her blanket beside Mabel, but sleep remained elusive. She watched Nathan's silhouette against the moonlit window, wondering what kind of man he'd been before tragedy rewrote his story, and what kind of woman she might become now that hers had been similarly altered. Outside, an owl called mournfully. Into the night, its cry echoing across the valley where Silver Creek lay in ruins, and somewhere beyond, Juniper Ridge waited unaware of the danger heading its way. The dawn emerged reluctantly, pale light filtering through the cabin's broken roof. Eleanor woke to the sound of hushed voices, Nathan and Mabel planning their route to Juniper Ridge. She lay still for a moment, cataloguing the aches in her body, the dirt beneath her fingernails, the grit in her eyes. Nothing in her Boston life had prepared her for this. "We should follow Blackwater Creek," Nathan was saying. "It's longer but keeps us under cover." "My old bones won't thank you for the extra miles," Mabel replied, "but better sore than dead." Eleanor sat up, arranging her disheveled hair as best she could. "I vote for living as well." Nathan acknowledged her with a nod. The morning light revealed the toll of yesterday's flight, a new hollowness beneath his cheekbones, the stiffness in his movements as he checked his rifle. "Any sign of the raiders?" she asked. "Nothing yet, but they'll have men watching the main trails." He passed her a strip of jerky and a battered tin cup of water. "Eat. We leave in 10 minutes." The brisk efficiency might have offended her once. Now Eleanor appreciated the clarity of purpose. She ate quickly, helped Mabel to her feet, and gathered their meager belongings. Outside, the forest glittered with morning dew, deceptively peaceful. Nathan led them down a barely visible deer trail, descending toward the sound of running water. Eleanor supported Mabel over the rougher sections, impressed by the older woman's determination despite her obvious discomfort. "You should have been a nurse," Mabel commented, as Eleanor helped her across a fallen log. "You've got the right touch. Firm, but gentle." "I considered it," Eleanor admitted, "but teaching seemed more proper." Mabel's laugh was a dry rattle. Proper. That's a word we don't use much out here, not when survival's at stake. The creek appeared through the trees, water rushing over smooth stones. Nathan paused, scanning the crossing with practiced eyes before motioning them forward. "We'll follow this downstream," he said. "The water will mask our trail." "And freeze." "Our feet," Mabel muttered, but she stepped into the shallow edge without hesitation. Eleanor gasped as the icy water penetrated her boots. Her city footwear, chosen for its fashionable appearance rather than practicality, offered little protection against the mountain creek. Nathan noticed her discomfort, but said nothing, simply offering his arm as they navigated the slippery stones. His hand was rough with calluses, steady against her own. The contact felt oddly intimate after years of proper Boston handshakes through gloves. They traveled downstream for nearly an hour, alternating between the creek bed and the embankment, always staying within the cover of trees. Eleanor lost track of time, focused only on placing one foot before the other, on helping Mabel, on watching for the subtle signals Nathan used to alert them to potential danger. When they stopped to rest, she examined her boots. The leather, already cracking from the water, soles beginning to separate. They wouldn't last another day of this journey. "Here," Nathan said, interrupting her assessment. He held out a pair of moccasins, the leather worn but sturdy. "Found these at the cabin. They'll serve you better than those." Eleanor looked at the simple footwear, then at her ruined boots. Pride warred briefly with practicality before surrendering. "Thank you," she said, accepting them gratefully. "Don't thank me yet," Nathan replied, already turning away. "We've got a long way to go." The moccasins fit surprisingly well once she'd added an extra layer of stockings. They moved silently over the forest floor, allowing her to focus on their surroundings rather than her discomfort. By midday, the terrain had changed, the gentle valley giving way to steeper slopes. They climbed steadily, following a narrow game trail that switched back through increasingly dense forest. Mabel's breathing grew labored, but she waved off Eleanor's concerned glances. "Just need a moment now and then," the older woman insisted during one of their brief rests. "These hills aren't foreign to me." Eleanor marveled at her resilience. "How long have you lived in these mountains?" 38 years, Mabel said, eyes distant with memory. "Came out with my husband when Silver Creek was nothing but a few tents and big dreams. Buried him 15 years back during a fever that took half the camp." "I'm sorry." Mabel shrugged. "Life takes what it takes. We endure." She patted Eleanor's hand. "You're doing the same now, whether you know it or not." The simple truth of that observation lingered as they resumed their journey. Eleanor was enduring, adapting with each step farther from the life she'd planned toward an uncertain future she couldn't yet imagine. Nathan maintained a relentless pace, stopping only when Mabel needed rest. His vigilance never wavered, checking their backtrail, scanning ridgelines, listening to the forest's subtle language. Yet for all his focus on external threats, Eleanor sensed internal wounds that ran deeper than his physical injuries. Late afternoon brought them to a rocky outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the valley they'd left behind. In the distance, thin columns of smoke still rose from Silver Creek's ruins. But what froze Eleanor's blood was the sight of riders, at least a dozen, spreading out along the valley floor, methodically searching. "They've picked up our trail," Nathan said grimly. Mabel sank onto a boulder, her face grey with exhaustion. "They're persistent, I'll give them that." "How far to Juniper Ridge?" Eleanor asked. Still a day's travel, maybe more. Nathan's jaw tightened as he studied the distant riders. We need to move faster. Eleanor glanced at Mabel, whose attempt to hide her fatigue fooled no one. Mabel needs rest. And you need warning Juniper Ridge, Mabel countered. Don't use an old woman as an excuse to slow down. Nathan looked between them, conflict evident in his expression. There's a place we might reach before nightfall. Old mining claim, abandoned years ago. We'd have shelter, and it's defensible. How far? Eleanor asked. 3 hours, hard traveling. Mabel straightened her spine. Then we'd best get moving. The hard traveling proved even more difficult than Eleanor anticipated. The trail grew steeper, crossing rocky terrain that offered little cover. Nathan set a punishing pace, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Eleanor kept one eye on Mabel and the other on their surroundings, trying to spot danger before it spotted them. The sun was sinking toward the jagged horizon when Nathan finally raised his hand, signaling a halt. Ahead, nestled against a cliff, face stood a crude cabin with a partially collapsed roof. Beside it, the black mouth of a mine shaft gaped like an open wound in the mountainside. Hanson's Folly, Nathan said, voice low. Old prospector spent 15 years looking for a vein that wasn't there. Looks abandoned, Eleanor observed, noting the rotted door hanging from one hinge. Has been since 76. Most folks avoid it. Talk of cave-ins, bad air. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. Rumors I might have encouraged. The interior was dusty but intact, with a stone fireplace along one wall and rough-hewn furniture scattered about. Nathan carefully inspected the entire structure before allowing them to settle inside. We can risk a small fire, he decided, eyeing Mabel's shivering form. Smoke will disperse through the roof holes, and we're high enough that it won't be easily spotted. Eleanor helped Mabel onto a rickety cot, while Nathan built a fire. The older woman's hands were icy, her breathing shallow. Just need to warm these old bones, Mabel insisted, though her voice lacked its usual vigor. Eleanor removed her shawl and tucked it around Mabel's shoulders. Rest now. I'll make some tea if Nathan has any left. Outside, the light was fading rapidly, shadows stretching across the mountainside like reaching fingers. Eleanor stepped onto the cabin's small porch, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. From this height, she could see for miles the rolling forests, the silver ribbon of the river, the distant smudge that must be Juniper Ridge. Beautiful, isn't it? Nathan's voice came from behind her. Easy to forget the danger when you see it like this. Eleanor nodded, unable to deny the majesty of the landscape despite everything. Is this what drew you west? The beauty? Partly. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes scanning the horizon habitually. Mostly it was the space, room to breathe, to build something that was mine alone. And did you build something? A muscle in his jaw tightened. I thought so. Had the forge, contracts with the mine, was saving for more land. His voice hardened. All gone now. The loss in those simple words echoed her own. Different dreams, same ending. We should check on Mabel, Eleanor said after a moment. Inside, the fire had warmed the small space, creating a circle of light against the encroaching darkness. Mabel slept fitfully, her breathing easier but still labored. She needs real rest, proper food, Eleanor said quietly. Nathan nodded. Juniper Ridge has a doctor. Not much of one, but better than nothing. Will they welcome us? Refugees from Silver Creek. Some will. Nathan stoked the fire carefully. Some won't want the trouble we bring. Eleanor understood. Fear made people cruel, made them turn away from others' suffering to protect their own fragile security. She'd seen it in Boston after the Great Fire, when those unaffected had quickly tired of helping those who'd lost everything. I'll take first watch, Nathan said, moving toward the door. Try to get some sleep. But sleep proved elusive. Eleanor lay on a threadbare blanket near the fire, listening to the night sounds filtering through the broken roof. The hoot of an owl, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Beneath it all ran a current of unease, a sense of borrowed time. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke with a start to Nathan's hand on her shoulder. "Someone's coming," he whispered, face tense in the dying firelight. Eleanor's heart hammered as she sat up. "Raiders!" "Don't think so. Too careful, too quiet." He passed her the pistol. "Stay with Mabel. If anyone but me comes through that door, I understand." Her hand closed around the weapon, the metal cold against her palm. Nathan slipped outside, a shadow merging with shadows. Eleanor moved to Mabel, gently waking the older woman. "We may have company," she murmured, helping Mabel sit up against the wall. Mabel's eyes, roomy with age but sharp with intelligence, darted to the door. "Hand me that shotgun." Nathan said to stay hidden. "And I say a second gun never hurt anyone on our side." Mabel's tone brooked no argument. "I've been shooting longer than you've been breathing, girl." Eleanor passed her the weapon, then positioned herself near the door, pistol raised. Outside, the night had gone unnaturally silent. No animal sounds, no rustling leaves, just the heavy quiet of held breath. A twig snapped impossibly loud in the stillness. Eleanor tightened her grip on the pistol, remembering Nathan's instructions. 6 shots. Make them count. The whisper came so softly she almost missed it. "Eleanor, it's clear." She hesitated, suspicious of the ease with which someone might imitate Nathan's voice. "Prove it's you." A pause, then. "You wore Boston boots that weren't worth a damn in the creek." Relief flooded through her as she unbarred the door. Nathan entered, followed by a stranger, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard and rifle slung across his back. "This is Jacob Brennan," Nathan said, "one of the Silver Creek survivors I mentioned." The newcomer nodded respectfully. "Ma'am, Mabel." "Jacob." Mabel lowered her shotgun. "Thought you'd be halfway to Fort Benton by now." "Got as far as Juniper Ridge," Jacob replied, accepting a cup of water from Eleanor. "Town's in an uproar. Refugees coming in with stories. Some think it's just bandits, others know better." "Rawlins," Nathan said darkly. Jacob nodded. "His gang's grown, not just opportunists anymore. He's building something organized, deliberate." "But why?" Eleanor asked. "Why destroy an entire town?" The men exchanged glances laden with unspoken knowledge. "Silver Creek was prospering," Nathan said finally. "New vein discovered in the North Shaft, richest one yet. Word was spreading." "And Rawlins doesn't want prosperous, independent towns," Jacob added. "He wants desperate people, scared people, easier to control." "Control for what purpose?" Eleanor pressed. "Territory," Nathan said simply. "The kind no marshal or army patrol bothers with. He's building his own kingdom out here, piece by piece." The revelation settled over the cabin like a physical weight. This wasn't random violence or simple thievery, but something more calculated, more ambitious. "Juniper Ridge is next," Jacob continued. "That's why I came back, to warn those who got out." "How did you find us?" Eleanor asked, suspicion flickering. "Wasn't looking for you specifically," Jacob admitted. "Was checking all the old claims, hunting cabins, places survivors might hole up." Nathan's expression remained guarded. "Who else knows you're here?" "No one." Jacob met his gaze steadily. "I'm not a fool, Nathan. Know what's at stake." Mabel coughed, drawing their attention. "What's the plan then, since you men always have one?" Jacob set down his cup. "Get to Juniper Ridge. Convince enough folks of the danger to mount a defense, or evacuate if they've got sense." "Rawlins has men on every trail," Nathan countered. "Not every trail." Jacob's eyes gleamed in the firelight. There's the high pass. Nathan shook his head immediately. Too dangerous, especially with Mabel. What's the high pass? Eleanor asked. Old game trail that cuts through Blackwater Canyon, Jacob explained. A treacherous in parts, but it would put us in Juniper Ridge by tomorrow evening. And possibly at the bottom of a ravine, Nathan added grimly. Mabel straightened. I've crossed worse in my time. If it gets us there quicker, I vote for the pass. Eleanor studied the three faces in the flickering light. Nathan's reluctance, Jacob's determination, Mabel's stubborn resolve. The decision felt momentous, lives balancing on a choice between known dangers and unknown risks. I trust Nathan's judgment, she said finally. If he says the pass is too dangerous. I didn't say we had better options, Nathan interrupted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Just that I don't like it. Jacob stood. We should move at first light, get as far as the canyon entrance before the sun's high. As the men discussed the route, Eleanor helped Mabel drink some broth Nathan had prepared from his dwindling supplies. The older woman's hands shook slightly, but her eyes remained clear and determined. You're worried, Mabel observed quietly. Eleanor managed a small smile. Aren't you? Too old for worry. Burns energy you need for doing. Mabel patted Eleanor's hand. You're stronger than you know, girl. This place shows people their true measure. I'm not sure I recognize myself anymore, Eleanor admitted. 3 days ago I was concerned about which books to bring, which dresses would be suitable for a miner's wife. And now? Now I'm learning to shoot, helping plan escape routes through mountain passes. She shook her head in wonder. If my Boston friends could see me, they'd see what I see, Mabel said firmly. A woman finding her steel. The phrase stayed with Eleanor as they prepared for sleep, Nathan and Jacob taking turns at watch. Finding her steel. Was that what this crucible of danger and loss was forging in her? She'd come west seeking a new life, never imagining it would arrive in such a terrible form. Yet there was truth in Mabel's words. Each decision, each step away from the ruins of Silver Creek, had required something from Eleanor that she hadn't known she possessed. Not just courage, but adaptability, clarity of purpose, a willingness to shed the constraints of her former life. Morning came too quickly, grey light seeping through the cabin's broken walls. They ate a sparse breakfast in silence, each absorbed in private thoughts. Nathan distributed what supplies remained, ensuring Mabel had the lightest pack while taking the heaviest himself. The high pass follows the ridge for 2 miles, Jacob explained as they prepared to leave, then drops into Blackwater Canyon. The trail narrows there, single file only, sheer drop to the right. Sounds delightful, Mabel muttered. After the canyon, we'll hit Settlers Creek, Jacob continued. Follow that north to Juniper Ridge. Eleanor adjusted the moccasins, tightening the leather ties around her ankles. They felt strange after a lifetime of proper footwear, but their grip on the rocky terrain had already proven invaluable. Everyone clear on the route? Nathan asked, checking his rifle one final time. If we get separated, keep moving north. Juniper Ridge sits in a valley between 2 buttes. You can't miss it. The gravity of his words settled over them. Getting separated was a polite euphemism for someone being captured or killed while the others escaped. They set out as dawn broke fully, climbing higher along the ridge that sheltered Hanson's Folly. The air grew thinner, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Eleanor found her rhythm quickly, matching her steps to Nathan's measured pace, turning occasionally to ensure Mabel kept up with Jacob's support. The beauty of the landscape was undeniable, even as danger shadowed their path. Sun-touched peaks stretched in every direction, valleys filled with forests that shimmered gold and crimson with autumn's advance. In another life, Eleanor might have stopped to sketch the vista, to capture its wild majesty. Instead, she scanned constantly for movement, for anything that might signal pursuit. Nathan had taught her the basics, watching for birds taking sudden flight, listening for the unnatural quiet that indicated human presence, noting the direction of the wind to carry their scent away from the trail behind. By mid-morning, they'd reached the point where the ridge narrowed dramatically, forming the entrance to Blackwater Canyon. The trail ahead clung to the cliff face, barely wide enough for a single person, with a dizzying drop to the right, where the canyon plunged hundreds of feet to the river below. "This is the worst stretch," Jacob said, pausing to secure his pack more tightly. "About half a mile of narrow trail, then it widens again on the other side." Nathan studied the crossing, expression grim. "I'll go first, then Eleanor, Mabel, and Jacob bringing up the rear." No one argued with the arrangement. Nathan stepped onto the trail, testing each foothold before committing his weight. Eleanor watched carefully, noting where he placed his hands against the rock wall for balance, how he kept his body close to the cliff face. When her turn came, she forced herself to focus only on the section of trail directly before her. Looking down at the chasm would only invite panic, and panic would be fatal here. The rock was cool beneath her fingers, the path narrower than it had appeared from a distance. Small stones skittered away from her feet, disappearing into the void with tiny echoing sounds that emphasized the drop. "Steady!" Nathan called from ahead, his voice reassuringly calm. "Just like that, one step at a time." The advice applied to more than just their current crossing, Eleanor reflected. One step at a time was how they'd all survived since Silver Creek's destruction. It was how they would continue. Behind her she heard Mabel's labored breathing, the older woman's determination evident in each careful movement. Jacob murmured occasional encouragement, his larger frame making the narrow ledge even more precarious. They were halfway across when the shot rang out. The sound echoed through the canyon, startling a flock of ravens into flight from the trees below. Eleanor froze, pressing herself against the cliff face as loose stones rained down from above. "Riders on the ridge!" Jacob shouted. "They've spotted us!" More shots followed, bullets striking the rock face with sharp cracks, sending fragments flying. Eleanor ducked instinctively, heart hammering against her ribs. "Move!" Nathan yelled from ahead. "Don't stop!" She forced herself forward, abandoning caution for speed. The trail blurred beneath her feet, her focus narrowing to the next step, the next handhold. Behind her, Mabel gasped as a bullet struck too close, showering her with stone chips. Nathan reached the wider section of trail and turned, rifle raised, providing covering fire as Eleanor scrambled toward him. The distance seemed impossible, stretching endlessly before her as more shots rang out from above. "Almost there!" Nathan called. "Keep moving!" She reached him just as Jacob shouted in pain. Eleanor turned to see the big man stumble, clutching, his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Mabel grabbed his belt, steadying him against the cliff face. "Go!" Jacob urged them, his face contorted with pain but resolute. "I'll hold them here." "Not leaving you," Nathan growled, firing up at the ridge where puffs of gunsmoke betrayed the raiders' positions. Eleanor made a split-second decision. She darted back along the narrow trail toward Mabel and Jacob, ignoring Nathan's shout of protest. Reaching them, she ducked under Jacob's uninjured arm. "Lean on me," she ordered. "Mabel, stay between us and the cliff." Together, they moved forward in an awkward huddle, Jacob's weight threatening to overbalance them toward the chasm with each step. Eleanor's muscles screamed in protest, but she kept moving, kept placing one foot before the other on the treacherous path. Nathan continued providing cover fire, his shots carefully placed to force the raiders to keep their heads down. The distance closed agonizingly slowly. Each yard gained a victory of will over terror. When they finally reached the wider section of trail, Eleanor's legs nearly buckled with relief. Nathan immediately pulled them behind a large boulder, relative safety after the exposed cliff face. "How bad?" he asked, examining Jacob's wound. "Clean through," Jacob grunted. "Hurts like hell, but I'll live." Mabel was already tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages. "Hold still, you big ox. Need to stop that bleeding." Eleanor peered around the boulder. The raiders had stopped firing, likely repositioning to get a clearer shot at their new location. "We need to keep moving," she said urgently. "They'll be coming around the ridge." Nathan nodded, his expression grim but appreciative of her assessment. "Canyon opens up ahead, more cover but less protection at our backs." Jacob struggled to his feet with Mabel's help. "I can make it." "You'll make it because you have no choice," Mabel informed him tartly, tightening the bandage with practiced efficiency. They moved deeper into the canyon, the trail widening into a proper path that wound among massive boulders and stunted pines. The walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, offering cover but also limiting their options. Nathan led them unerringly, choosing paths that provided maximum protection while making steady progress northward. The sound of pursuit grew behind them, voices calling to each other, the distant clatter of horses forced down treacherous slopes. The raiders were coming, abandoning stealth for speed. "There!" Nathan pointed ahead to where the canyon narrowed again. "Bottleneck. We can slow them there." They reached the natural choke point, just as the first raiders appeared around a bend behind them. Jacob and Nathan positioned themselves behind fallen trees, rifles ready, while Eleanor helped Mabel to shelter behind a massive boulder. "Take this," Jacob passed Eleanor his pistol. "6 shots, make them count." The words echoed Nathan's earlier instruction, a lifetime ago outside the mine office. Eleanor checked the chamber with newfound familiarity, the weight of the weapon no longer foreign in her hands. The first raider rounded the corner at a run and fell immediately to Nathan's shot. The second managed to fire before Jacob's bullet found him. The third and fourth took cover, calling back to others still out of sight. "They'll try to flank us," Nathan said tersely. "We need to move after the next volley." Eleanor understood the brutal mathematics. They couldn't win a prolonged exchange, not with limited ammunition and a wounded man. Their only advantage was knowing the terrain better than their pursuers. The raiders launched a coordinated attack, multiple guns firing simultaneously to pin them down, while others attempted to work around their position. Nathan's rifle cracked steadily, each shot deliberate. Jacob, weakening from blood loss, still managed to drop another attacker. "Now!" Nathan ordered during a brief lull. "Through the narrows!" They moved as one, Eleanor supporting Mabel while Jacob covered their retreat. Nathan led them through the bottleneck and immediately off the main trail, up a steep game path that switched back toward the canyon rim. Behind them, shouts of confusion turned to anger as the raiders realized their quarry had slipped away. More shots followed, bullets whining harmlessly overhead as they climbed higher, putting solid rock between themselves and their pursuers. The climb seemed endless, each switchback revealing another stretch of perilous ascent. Eleanor's lungs burned with the effort, her arms aching from supporting Mabel's increasingly unsteady frame. Behind them, Jacob's breathing had grown ragged, his face ashen beneath the dirt and stubble. Only Nathan appeared tireless, scouting ahead and doubling back, urging them onward with quiet determination. "Can't hear them anymore," Mabel gasped, during a brief rest. "Lost them?" Nathan shook his head. "Just bought time. They'll track us once they figure out which path we took." The canyon rim loomed tantalizingly close, perhaps another 100 feet of vertical climbing. Beyond it lay the unknown, more forest, more mountains, but also their best chance of reaching Juniper Ridge alive. "We need to keep moving," Eleanor said, helping Mabel to her feet. The older woman swayed slightly, but squared her shoulders with characteristic resolve. "Don't you worry about me, child. These old legs still work." Jacob pushed himself upright with visible effort. Blood had soaked through his makeshift bandage, and his skin had taken on a waxy pallor that Eleanor recognized from her limited experience with wounded soldiers during the hospital drives in Boston. He needed medical attention soon. "Nathan," she called softly, drawing him aside. "Jacob won't make it much further without help." Nathan glanced at the wounded man, his expression tight. "I know, but we can't stop here. What about once we reach the rim? Might there be somewhere to shelter, to tend him properly?" "There's an old line shack about 2 miles north," Nathan replied after a moment's thought. "Trappers use it in winter. Basic supplies, might have medicine." Hope flickered. 2 miles is manageable, in good conditions with healthy people. Nathan's realistic assessment was neither cruel nor discouraging, simply factual, but it's our best option. The final push to the rim took everything they had. Eleanor found herself moving on pure will, one hand steadying Mabel, the other occasionally helping Jacob when the path grew too steep. Nathan took point, rifle ready, never relaxing his vigilance despite their apparent escape. When they finally crested the rim, the valley beyond stole what little breath Eleanor had left. Unlike the harsh walls of Blackwater Canyon, this side opened into a rolling meadow dotted with aspens turned golden by autumn. The beauty seemed incongruous with their desperate circumstances. "Line shack's there." Nathan pointed toward a distant tree line. "Stay under cover as much as possible. Meadows exposed." They moved in a ragged line, keeping to the sparse cover offered by rock outcroppings and isolated tree clusters. Jacob stumbled more frequently now, leaning heavily on his rifle like a walking stick. Mabel had lapsed into silence, conserving her energy for the journey. Eleanor found herself watching Nathan, the set of his shoulders, the economy of his movements, the constant scanning of their surroundings. He'd been a stranger 4 days ago, yet she now trusted him with her life without question. The realization was both unsettling and oddly comforting. The line shack appeared as they entered the forest proper, a humble structure of weathered logs with a sloping roof and single smoke-blackened window. Nathan approached cautiously, signaling the others to wait as he circled the building, checking for signs of recent occupation. "Clear," he called finally, "but someone's been here within the week." The interior matched the exterior in simplicity. A plank table, 2 crude bunks, a stone fireplace with an iron pot hanging above. Shelves along one wall held dusty jars and tins, a few tools, and a wooden box that proved to contain basic medical supplies. "Trappers believe in preparedness," Nathan explained, examining the supplies. "Winters up here can trap a man for months." Eleanor immediately set to work on Jacob, easing him onto one of the bunks while Mabel sorted through the medical box. The bullet wound looked angry, the flesh around it hot to the touch. "Starting to fester," Mabel murmured. "Need to clean it proper, then poultice." They worked together with the easy coordination of long-time healers, though Eleanor's experience came from books and limited volunteer work, rather than Mabel's lifetime of practical knowledge. Nathan built a small fire in the fireplace, heating water for both tea and wound cleaning. "Any sign of pursuit?" Eleanor asked, as he returned from checking their back trail. "Nothing yet." Nathan set more water to boil, but they're not the type to give up easily. Jacob drifted in and out of consciousness as they worked on his wound, his few coherent moments spent insisting they shouldn't have stopped for him. "Hush that foolishness," Mabel scolded, applying a pungent poultice to the cleaned wound. "We don't leave our own." Eleanor wondered when they had become our own, this makeshift family forged in tragedy. 4 strangers with nothing in common but survival, yet bound by something stronger than convenience. Night fell quickly in the high country, darkness seeping through the trees like spilled ink. They ate a sparse meal from the shack's supplies, beans, jerky and hardtack softened in hot water. The fire offered warmth, but also risk, its light visible through the single window, despite Nathan's efforts to shield it. "I'll take first watch," he said, checking his rifle before moving toward the door. "Wake me in 4 hours," Eleanor replied. When Nathan started to protest, she added firmly, "You're no good to us exhausted. I can shoot and I can stay awake." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. He nodded once, then slipped outside to take up position nearby. Eleanor tended to Jacob while Mabel finally succumbed to exhaustion on the second bunk. The wounded man's fever had risen despite their care, his sleep restless and sweat-soaked. She bathed his forehead with cool water, changed the poultice as Mabel had instructed, and murmured reassurances when he called out for people she didn't know. The night stretched endlessly, marked by Jacob's labored breathing and the occasional call of an owl outside. Eleanor found herself thinking of Thomas Wilkins, the man she'd traveled so far to marry. His letters had described Silver Creek with such optimism. The growing town, the opportunities, the community he was proud to be building. All gone now. The community scattered or buried, the town reduced to charred timbers, and Thomas himself. Eleanor realized she hadn't even asked where he was buried, if he'd been buried at all. The thought brought unexpected tears, grief for a future that had died before she could even experience it. She wiped them away quickly. Tears were a luxury they couldn't afford, not with dangers still hunting them, and miles yet to travel. A soft scuff at the door announced Nathan's return. He entered silently, his face shadowed with fatigue and something more. Concern. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, keeping her voice low. "Firelight on the ridge south of here," Nathan replied, warming his hands by the dying embers. "Could be our pursuers, could be other travelers. But you don't think so?" "No." His honesty was unflinching. "They're tracking us methodically. We need to move at first light." Eleanor glanced at Jacob's still form. "Will he survive the journey?" "If we stay, none of us might survive," Nathan said simply. "Better to try with poor odds than wait with none." The brutal calculus of their situation settled between them. Eleanor nodded, accepting the truth. Of his assessment, "You should rest," she said. "I'll wake you before dawn." Nathan hesitated, studying her with an intensity that made her flush. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. A Boston schoolteacher out of her depth? A woman who adapts instead of breaks. The quiet admiration in his voice warmed. Something inside her. Most people, men included, would have collapsed by now. Eleanor thought of the life she'd left behind, the predictable rhythm of lessons and social calls, the carefully maintained propriety, the endless dance of expectations and limitations. "Perhaps I was ready for something different," she said softly, "even if I didn't know what form it would take." Nathan nodded as if he understood perfectly. Perhaps he did. Perhaps the West called to certain souls, those seeking reinvention, those willing to risk comfort for possibility. "Rest," Eleanor repeated gently. "Tomorrow will demand everything from all of us." She watched as he settled onto the floor near the fire, rifle within easy reach even in sleep. Within minutes his breathing had deepened, exhaustion claiming him despite his vigilance. Eleanor returned to her vigil beside Jacob, monitoring his fever while her mind worked through their options. Juniper Ridge lay perhaps 15 miles northeast, according to Nathan's estimate. A day's journey for healthy travelers in good conditions. For their battered group, pursued by determined enemies, it might as well have been 100 miles. Yet what choice did they have? The line shack offered temporary shelter, but no real safety. Juniper Ridge promised medical care for Jacob, potential sanctuary for Mabel, and perhaps allies against Rawlins' growing threat. Dawn arrived with dismal clarity, grey light filtering through the single window. Eleanor had dozed intermittently, jerking awake at every sound from the forest outside. Jacob's condition had worsened overnight, his fever rising despite their efforts. Mabel looked years older in the harsh morning light, the journey's toll evident in every line of her face. Only Nathan appeared ready for the challenges ahead, his movements efficient as he prepared for departure. He'd already scouted their immediate surroundings, packed what supplies they could carry, and outlined their route. "We'll follow the ridge east for 3 miles, he explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt floor. Then drop down to Settlers Creek. It's longer than cutting straight north, but offers better cover." "And if they're still tracking us?" Eleanor asked. "Then we deal with that when it comes." Nathan glanced at Jacob's still form. "We'll need to make a travois for him. He can't walk." The makeshift stretcher took precious time to construct, fashioned from branches and the blankets from the bunks. Jacob roused enough to protest weakly before subsiding into semi-consciousness. "I'll take the first pull," Nathan said, testing the travois' balance. "We'll rotate when needed." The unspoken question hung between them. How far could they actually transport a grown man through mountainous terrain? Nathan's eyes met Eleanor's, acknowledging the challenge without surrendering to it. They set out as the morning mist still clung to the forest floor, moving east along the ridge as Nathan had planned. The going was slow, the travois catching on roots and rocks despite their best efforts to choose a smooth path. Jacob's occasional groans cut through the forest's morning sounds, each one tightening Eleanor's resolve to reach Juniper Ridge. Mabel walked with determination, refusing assistance except on the steepest sections. Her knowledge of medicinal plants proved valuable, identifying herbs they gathered along the way to help manage Jacob's fever. By mid-morning, they'd covered perhaps 2 miles, far less than they needed. Nathan's face showed the strain of pulling, the travois, though he rebuffed Eleanor's attempts to take over. "Need your hands free," he said tersely. "You're our best shot besides me." The compliment, delivered as simple fact, surprised her. Eleanor had never fired a weapon before Silver Creek, yet Nathan trusted her to defend them if necessary. The responsibility settled on her shoulders, unexpectedly empowering. They paused at a small stream to refill their canteens and check Jacob's wound. The infection had spread, angry red streaks extending from the bullet hole. "Blood poisoning," Mabel murmured, her experienced eyes assessing the danger. "Needs a proper doctor, and soon." Nathan exchanged a look with Eleanor, the unspoken truth passing between them. Jacob might not survive even if they reached Juniper Ridge. "We keep moving," Eleanor said firmly. "That's all we can do." The terrain grew more challenging as they continued east, the ridge narrowing in places to little more than a rocky spine. The travois became increasingly difficult to manage, requiring all 3 of them at times to navigate particularly treacherous sections. It was near one such narrow passage that disaster struck. The shot came without warning, echoing across the ridge like thunder. Dirt exploded near Eleanor's feet, followed by the delayed crack of a rifle. Nathan reacted instantly, shoving her behind a boulder while scanning for the shooter. "Sniper," he muttered. "Ridge to the south. They anticipated our route." More shots followed, forcing them to press against the meager cover of scattered rocks. Jacob lay exposed on the travois, too heavy to drag to safety quickly. "Cover me," Nathan said, passing Eleanor his rifle before she could protest. He darted out, grabbing the travois handles and dragging Jacob behind a larger boulder as bullets kicked up dirt around him. Eleanor raised the rifle, aiming toward the distant ridge where puffs of smoke betrayed the sniper's position. She fired twice, not expecting to hit at such range, but hoping to force the shooter to take cover. "See anyone else?" Nathan asked, breathing hard as he rejoined her. "Not yet." Eleanor scanned the surrounding terrain, but they wouldn't send just one. As if confirming her assessment, movement caught her eye. Riders approaching from the sea west, following their trail along the ridge. At least 4 men, moving quickly now that stealth was abandoned. "We're pinned," Nathan said grimly. "Sniper to the south, riders from behind." Eleanor assessed their position with newfound tactical clarity. The ridge continued east, offering their only path forward, but leaving them exposed to the sniper. Behind them, the approaching riders would arrive within minutes. To the north, the ridge dropped away steeply, too precipitous to descend safely, especially with Jacob. "What about south?" she asked. "Toward the sniper?" Nathan's eyes widened, slightly at her suggestion. "It's what they least expect," he acknowledged, "but we'd be exposed crossing the saddle between ridges." "Not if we give them something else to watch," Eleanor said, an idea forming. "The travois. We could send it east, make them think we're continuing along the ridge." A hint of admiration touched Nathan's face. "Create a diversion." "Jacob can't travel that way anyway," Mabel added pragmatically. "Better to carry him." They worked quickly, securing the empty travois with rocks so it wouldn't immediately roll away. Nathan positioned Jacob's hat on one end, creating the illusion of an injured man still being transported. "When I give the signal," Nathan instructed, "push it onto the trail. Then we go south fast as we can. Stay low. Use any cover available." Eleanor nodded, positioning herself beside the travois, while Nathan checked Jacob. The wounded man had lapsed into complete unconsciousness, which was perhaps a blessing given what lay ahead. "Ready," Nathan called softly. "Now!" Eleanor shoved the travois onto the exposed trail, where it began rolling eastward along the slight decline. Almost immediately, shots rang out, the sniper focusing on the moving target. "Go!" Nathan shouted. They burst from cover, Nathan carrying Jacob over his shoulder in a firefighter's carry, Eleanor supporting Mabel as they sprinted across open ground toward the saddle connecting their ridge to the southern one. The sniper, focused on the travois, took precious seconds to realize the deception. By then, they'd covered half the distance to the saddle. Bullets began striking around them as both the sniper and the approaching riders opened fire, but the angle was poor and the range increasing. Eleanor's world narrowed to the ground before her feet, to Mabel's labored breathing beside her, to the desperate sprint for safety. They reached the saddle and plunged down the southern slope just as riders crested the ridge behind them. "Keep moving," Nathan urged, his voice strained under Jacob's weight. "There's a ravine ahead, might offer cover." The descent was treacherous, loose shale sliding beneath their feet, branches whipping their faces as they half ran, half slid down the steep incline. Behind them, shouts and gunfire continued, but the terrain worked in their favor for once, the dense forest swallowing them from view. They reached the ravine, a deep cut in the mountainside with a small stream running through its center. Nathan eased Jacob down against a fallen tree, his own strength finally flagging after the extraordinary effort. "They'll follow," he gasped, wiping sweat from his brow, "but it'll take time to get the horses down safely." Eleanor helped Mabel sit, then quickly assessed their situation. The ravine ran roughly east-west, cutting across their intended path, to Juniper Ridge. Following it might lead them away from their destination, but also away from their pursuers. "Which way?" she asked, deferring to Nathan's superior knowledge of the terrain. He hesitated, studying the ravine's course. "East. It eventually joins Settlers Creek, which was our original plan." His gaze shifted to Jacob, "But we can't carry him far." The unspoken implication hung between them. Jacob was dying. Carrying him might doom them all, yet leaving him was unthinkable. Mabel moved to Jacob's side, checking his pulse. "He's still with us," she said quietly, "but fading." Eleanor made a decision. "We follow the ravine east for as long as we can. If we hear riders—" She couldn't finish the thought. Nathan nodded, understanding. "1 hour at a time," he said. "That's all we can promise." They fashioned a crude sling from their remaining blanket, creating a two-person carry that distributed Jacob's weight between Nathan and Eleanor. Mabel walked ahead, her knowledge of healing plants focused now on finding anything that might ease Jacob's suffering. The ravine provided good cover, but difficult terrain. Fallen trees, slippery rocks, sections where the stream took up the entire passage. They progressed slowly, ears straining for sounds of pursuit. An hour passed, then another. The day warmed around them, insects buzzing in the dappled light filtering through the canopy above. Jacob's breathing grew increasingly labored, each exhale a rattle that spoke of approaching death. "Need to rest," Mabel announced finally, her own reserves clearly depleted. They eased Jacob down in a small clearing where the ravine widened slightly. Eleanor dampened a cloth in the stream and bathed his face while Nathan secured their perimeter, checking for signs of pursuit. "Fever's worse," Eleanor murmured as Mabel joined her beside Jacob. The older woman nodded grimly. "Not long now." The brutal assessment hung in the air between them. Eleanor had known it was coming, had seen the symptoms worsening, yet hearing it spoken aloud made it unbearably real. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ease is passing," Mabel replied simply. "Make him comfortable. Say the words that need saying." Nathan returned, his expression confirming he'd overheard. "No sign of riders," he reported, kneeling beside Jacob. "But we can't stay long." Jacob's eyes fluttered open suddenly, surprising them all. His gaze wandered before focusing on Nathan's face. "How bad?" he rasped. Nathan didn't insult him with false hope. Bad enough. A ghost of a smile touched Jacob's cracked lips. "Figured." His eyes found Eleanor. "Sorry, slowing you down." "You've helped us more than hindered," she assured him, taking his cold hand in hers. Jacob's focus shifted to Mabel. "You tell my Sarah. Tell her I tried to get back." Mabel nodded, tears glistening in her weathered face. "She knows, Jacob. She knows your heart." "Rawlins!" Jacob's voice strengthened with urgency. "Not just bandits building something. Army." Nathan leaned closer. "Building what, Jacob?" "Empire." The word emerged on a rattling breath. "Silver Creek. Just the first. Once. The territory. All of it." The revelation confirmed their worst fears. This wasn't random violence or opportunistic raiding, but calculated conquest. Silver Creek's destruction was merely the opening move in a larger campaign. "Juniper Ridge next," Jacob continued, each word clearly costing him, "has men inside already, waiting." Eleanor exchanged an alarmed glance with Nathan. The town they were fleeing toward might already be compromised. "Who, Jacob?" Nathan pressed. "Who's working with Rawlins in Juniper Ridge?" But Jacob's strength was fading rapidly. "Don't trust." His eyes drifted closed, his breathing shallow. "Jacob!" Nathan's voice sharpened with urgency. "Who can't we trust?" It was too late. Jacob's last breath escaped in a long sigh, his hand going limp in Eleanor's grasp. The forest seemed to pause around them, marking the moment with unnatural stillness. "He's gone," Mabel said softly, reaching out to close his eyes. They buried him there in the ravine, using Nathan's knife and Jacob's own canteen cup as makeshift tools. The grave was shallow, but the best they could manage under the circumstances. Mabel said simple words over the mounded earth while Eleanor gathered wildflowers to place on top. "We should mark it," she said, "so his wife can find him when this is over." Nathan nodded, using Jacob's knife to carve his initials into a nearby tree. It was insufficient, inadequate, yet all they could offer. The remainder of the day passed in somber travel, following the ravine as it gradually descended toward the valley below. Jacob's final warning weighed heavily on their minds. If Rawlins had infiltrated Juniper Ridge already, their destination offered danger rather than sanctuary. "We need to be cautious approaching the town," Nathan said as they rested briefly near dusk. "No announcing ourselves until we know who to trust." Jacob's wife, Sarah, would be trustworthy, Mabel suggested, if she made it there. "The preacher, too," Nathan added. "Reverend Holloway. He was visiting a homestead when Silver Creek was hit." Eleanor absorbed this information, constructing a mental map of potential allies in a town she'd never seen. "How will we find them without exposing ourselves?" "There's a farm on the outskirts," Nathan explained. "Belongs to a widow named Carson. Good woman keeps to herself. We could approach after dark, see if she'll shelter us while we send word to people we trust." The plan was tenuous at best, relying on the goodwill of strangers and the absence of Rawlins' spies. But it was all they had. As twilight deepened around them, they continued their journey, the ravine eventually opening into wider terrain as it joined a proper creek. "Settlers Creek," Nathan confirmed, orientation restored. "Juniper Ridge is about 5 miles north." The valley spread before them, bathed in the day's last light. Unlike the rugged mountains they'd traversed, this landscape was gentler. Rolling hills, meadows, occasional farmsteads visible as distant lantern lights in the gathering darkness. "Civilization," Mabel murmured, the word carrying both hope and wariness. They made camp in a small grove near the creek, unwilling to approach the town at night when their exhaustion might lead to fatal mistakes. The fire was tiny, just enough to heat water for the last of their tea, and they took turns keeping watch despite their bone-deep weariness. During her watch, Eleanor found herself studying the distant lights of Juniper Ridge. Somewhere in that collection of buildings was supposed to be safety, yet Jacob's warning had transformed it into another potential threat. How did one distinguish friend from foe when every stranger might be either? Nathan joined her silently, offering a blanket which she gratefully wrapped around her shoulders against the autumn night's chill. "Thinking about tomorrow?" he asked. "About trust," she replied. "How quickly it forms in some circumstances, how fragile it is in others." He nodded, understanding her unspoken concern. Jacob was sure about Rawlins having men in Juniper Ridge, but didn't live to tell us who. Eleanor sighed, frustrated by the incomplete warning. "We'll be walking blind." "Not entirely." Nathan's voice was thoughtful. "People reveal themselves through actions more than words. We watch carefully, move cautiously." Eleanor considered this practical approach. "You've survived this long by being observant." "By recognizing patterns," he corrected. "People follow patterns, even when they're trying to deceive." The insight revealed another layer of the man beside her, not just physically capable and knowledgeable about the terrain, but psychologically astute, a blacksmith who understood both metal and men. "What pattern am I following?" Eleanor asked, curious about his assessment. Nathan studied her for a moment before answering. "Adaptation. You shed what doesn't serve you, retain what does, like good steel under the hammer." The metaphor, drawn from his craft, struck her as surprisingly apt. She had been transformed by these days of danger and decision, folded and reforged into something stronger, more essential. "And what about you?" she asked. "What's your pattern?" "Protection," he said simply, "sometimes at a cost." The admission hung between them, intimate in its honesty. Eleanor sensed there was more, experiences that had shaped this pattern, losses that had defined it, but now wasn't the time to press. "We should both rest," she said finally. "Tomorrow will require clear heads." Nathan nodded, rising to check their perimeter one last time before seeking his own blanket. Eleanor watched him go, realizing with unexpected clarity that somewhere in their desperate flight from Silver Creek, she had come to care for this man beyond mere gratitude for salvation. The realization was inconvenient at best, dangerous at worst. Emotional attachments complicated survival decisions, created vulnerabilities where none should exist. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her when he was near, the sense of rightness when they worked together. She had come west to marry a stranger, chosen through careful correspondence. Fate had intervened brutally, replacing that plan with something wilder, more uncertain. Now she found herself drawn to a different man, one she knew through action rather than words on paper. Eleanor tucked the complication away, focusing instead on their immediate challenges. Juniper Ridge might offer sanctuary or further danger. Either way, they would face it together, this unlikely trio bound by shared survival. Morning brought fog rolling off Settlers Creek, transforming the valley into a dreamscape of shifting white and muted colors. They broke camp quickly, consuming the last of their provisions before setting out along the creek bank toward Juniper Ridge. Carson's farm should be about 2 miles north, Nathan said, orienting himself by the sun's position behind the fog. We'll approach from the west through her orchard to avoid being seen from the road. Eleanor adjusted the moccasins, now molded to her feet after days of wear. Her city clothes were nearly unrecognizable, torn, stained, patched with whatever materials they'd found along the way. She hardly cared. Function had thoroughly replaced fashion in her priorities. Mabel walked with renewed purpose, proximity to civilization seeming to invigorate her despite their caution. "Been too long since I slept in a proper bed," she remarked, "or had a cup of real coffee." "Let's survive reaching town before we worry about its amenities," Nathan advised dryly. They moved north through the fog-shrouded landscape, staying close to the creek where the mist was thickest. The terrain here was agricultural, fenced fields recently harvested, occasional barns or outbuildings looming through the whiteness. They avoided the main road, cutting across country with Nathan leading by some internal compass that never seemed to falter. Eleanor found herself watching for movement through the fog, every shadow potentially a threat. Jacob's warning had transformed this peaceful valley into hostile territory, where danger might wait behind any familiar facade. "There," Nathan said finally, pointing toward a 2-story farmhouse that materialized from the mist. Carson's place. The farm appeared well-maintained. Neat fences, a substantial barn, an apple orchard whose trees still bore late-season fruit. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating occupation. "How do we approach?" Eleanor asked, mindful of potential watchers. "Through the orchard," Nathan decided. "I'll go first, make sure it's safe. If anything seems wrong, I'll fire a warning shot." Eleanor wanted to protest the plan that put him at risk alone, but logic prevailed over emotion. Nathan moved most silently, knew Mrs. Carson personally, and could assess danger most accurately. "Be careful," she said instead. He nodded, once then slipped away through the mist, becoming one with the orchard's shadows. Eleanor and Mabel waited at the edge of the trees, minutes stretching painfully as fog swirled around them. Just when Eleanor's nerves had reached breaking point, a figure emerged from the whiteness, Nathan gesturing them forward. "It's safe," he said as they joined him. "Martha Carson's here alone." The farmhouse kitchen was warm and bright after days in the wilderness. Martha Carson proved to be a sturdy woman in her 50s, her face weathered but kind, her movements efficient as she prepared food for her unexpected guests. "Silver Creek gone," she murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. "Lord have mercy." "You've had no trouble here?" Nathan asked, accepting a cup of real coffee with visible appreciation. "Not yet," Mrs. Carson replied, "but we've had strangers passing through, asking questions, watching the town." "Rawlins' men," Mabel said grimly. Mrs. Carson nodded. "That's the name I've heard whispered. Some folks in town are proper scared. Others think it's just talk." "It's not just talk," Eleanor said quietly. "We've seen what they're capable of." Their hostess studied Eleanor with newfound interest. You're not from these parts." "I came to marry Thomas Wilkins," Eleanor explained. "Arrived to find silver." Greek destroyed. Understanding and sympathy flooded Mrs. Carson's face. "Oh, child, Thomas was a good man, well regarded." "So I've heard," Eleanor said, the grief still strange and distant for a man she'd never actually met. "What news from town?" Nathan asked, bringing the conversation back to immediate concerns. "Who's arrived from Silver Creek?" "Perhaps 20. Souls altogether," Mrs. Carson reported. "The pastor and his wife, the Brennan family, though not Jacob." Her eyes questioned. "He didn't make it," Nathan said simply. "He was with us, but his wounds were too severe." Mrs. Carson crossed herself. "God rest him. Sarah will be devastated." "Is she in town?" Mabel asked. "Yes, staying with Reverend Holloway's family." Mrs. Carson poured more coffee. "The town called a meeting yesterday to discuss the Silver Creek refugees and these rumors about Rawlins." "What was decided?" Nathan leaned forward intently. "Nothing in the end." Mrs. Carson's disapproval was evident. "Mayor Griffith said we shouldn't panic based on refugees' tales, said Silver Creek was hit by ordinary bandits, not some organized force." "He's wrong," Eleanor said firmly. "Dangerously wrong," Mrs. Carson nodded. "Some of us think the same. But Griffith has influence, and the sheriff seems to agree with him." Nathan and Eleanor exchanged glances, Jacob's warning about infiltrators echoing between them. Could the mayor or sheriff be working with Rawlins? Or were they simply unwilling to face an uncomfortable truth? "We need to warn those we can trust," Nathan decided. "Start with Reverend Holloway and the Silver Creek survivors." "I'll send my boy to fetch the Reverend," Mrs. Carson offered. "He can come after dark, less likely to be noticed." "Your boy?" Eleanor questioned, having seen no sign of children. "Farmhand," Mrs. Carson clarified. "Thomas, no relation to—" "Your Thomas works the place with me since my husband passed. He's in town getting supplies, but should be back soon." The plan set, they allowed themselves to truly rest for the first time in days. Mrs. Carson showed them to spare rooms where they could wash and change into clean clothes borrowed from her own wardrobes. The simple luxury of soap and water felt miraculous to Eleanor, who scrubbed days of mountain grime from her skin and hair. The woman who emerged bore little resemblance to the Boston schoolteacher who had stepped off the stagecoach at Silver Creek. That Eleanor Mitchell had been proper, contained, expectations neatly packaged in trunks and valises. This Eleanor was leaner, harder, her hands rough with calluses, her face weathered by sun and wind. The transformation went deeper than physical appearance. She moved differently now, more aware of her surroundings, more economical in her actions. She assessed rooms for exits, people for threats. She had killed to survive and buried a companion. She had crossed mountains and canyons on foot, navigated by stars, tracked game for food. She had become a woman of the West in the most brutal baptism imaginable. Mrs. Carson provided a simple dress that hung loose on Eleanor's frame, testament to the weight she'd lost during their journey. Still, the clean fabric felt wonderful against her skin, the normalcy of proper clothing, almost disorienting after days in tatters. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Nathan similarly transformed by basic grooming. He'd trimmed his beard, washed the trail dirt from his face and hands, and changed into clothes borrowed from Mrs. Carson's deceased husband. The result was startling. The hardened survivor giving way to glimpses of the man he'd been before tragedy struck. Their eyes met across the kitchen, recognition and something deeper passing between them. For a moment, they were simply a man and woman sharing a quiet domestic space, the dangers outside temporarily held at bay by wooden walls and warm hearthlight. "You clean up well?" Mabel observed dryly from her seat at the table, breaking the moment. "Both of you." Mrs. Carson smiled as she stirred a pot of stew. "Amazing what soap and clean clothes can accomplish." The kitchen door opened, admitting a burly young man with straw-colored hair and ruddy cheeks. He stopped short at the sight of strangers, hand instinctively moving toward his belt. "It's all right, Thomas," Mrs. Carson said quickly. "These folks are from Silver Creek." The farm hand relaxed slightly, though wariness remained in his eyes as he set down a sack of supplies. "Heard talk in town? More refugees came in last night, telling wild stories." "Not stories," Nathan said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Truth." Thomas assessed him with a practiced eye, taking in the capable stance, the watchfulness that soap and clean clothes couldn't erase. Whatever he saw evidently satisfied him, because he nodded once, accepting. "Town's divided," he reported, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Some wanting to organize defense, others saying it'll draw unwanted attention." "Mayor still downplaying the threat?" Nathan asked. "Him and the sheriff both." Thomas's expression darkened. "Sheriffs deputized 6 new men in the last 2 days. Strangers, most of them." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. "New deputies when there's no obvious need." "Exactly," Thomas agreed. "And they ain't patrolling, just watching, especially the roads in and out." Nathan exchanged a significant look with Eleanor. Jacob's warning about infiltrators seemed increasingly credible. "The Reverend?" Mrs. Carson asked. "Said he'd come after evening service," Thomas replied. "Alone, like you asked." They ate Mrs. Carson's hearty stew with the appreciation of people who'd subsisted on jerky and forage plants for days. Conversation remained focused on practical matters, who in town might be trusted, which Silver Creek survivors had reached. Juniper Ridge, what defenses the town possessed. "Town's got about 300 souls," Thomas explained. "One main street, buildings mostly wood except the bank and courthouse. Easy to defend if folks are organized and willing." "And if they're not?" Eleanor asked. Thomas's expression was grim. "Then it burns just like any other town." The statement hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Eleanor thought of Silver Creek's charred remains, of the lives extinguished there. The same fate could await Juniper Ridge if its citizens didn't recognize the danger approaching. Twilight deepened into true darkness outside the farmhouse windows. Mrs. Carson lit lamps and drew curtains, while Thomas checked the perimeter, securing the property with the thoroughness of a man accustomed to self-reliance. When he returned, he brought news that made them all tense. "Riders on the North Road, moving slow, looking at farms as they pass." "Rawlins' men?" Nathan asked, already reaching for his rifle. "Can't be sure," Thomas admitted. "But they ain't. Locals." "How far?" "Half-mile, maybe less. They stopped at the Peterson place asking questions." Mrs. Carson's face tightened with worry. "Mary Peterson talks too much for her own good. If they're checking farms, they'll reach here eventually," Eleanor said, mind racing through potential responses. "We need somewhere to hide." "Route, cellar," Mrs. Carson decided instantly. "Entrance is under the pantry rug. Thomas, show them while I prepare for visitors." The root cellar proved surprisingly spacious. A cool earthen chamber beneath the house, stocked with preserved foods and essential supplies. Thomas lit a single lantern once they were below, revealing rough benches along one wall and a narrow tunnel extending into darkness. "Leads to the barn," he explained, noting Eleanor's questioning glance. "My idea after Indian troubles a few years back, always have an escape route." The foresight impressed Eleanor. "You think ahead. Out. Here you have to." Thomas checked the tunnel entrance, ensuring it was passable. "Stay quiet when they come. These walls are thick, but sound carries strange sometimes." They settled on the benches, the cellar's chill seeping through their borrowed clothes. Above, floorboards creaked as Mrs. Carson moved about, preparing her performance for the unwelcome. "Visitors. What if it's just ordinary travelers?" Mabel asked, voicing the hope none of them truly believed. "Then we'll have been cautious for nothing," Nathan replied. But I don't believe in that kind of coincidence." His hand rested on his rifle, ready. They didn't wait long. The sound of approaching horses reached them even through the cellar walls, followed by the heavy tread of boots on the porch and a pounding at the door that held more demand than request. Mrs. Carson's muffled voice carried down to them, the words indistinct, but the tone perfectly calibrated, polite confusion giving way to cautious hospitality. Male voices responded, too low to decipher clearly. Eleanor found herself holding her breath as footsteps moved across the floorboards directly above. They seemed to be searching the house, their movements methodical, despite Mrs. Carson's audible protests. Nathan silently slipped closer to the cellar entrance, positioning himself where he could defend it if discovered. Eleanor did the same on the opposite side, Mabel's shotgun in her hands. Thomas extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness, relieved only by faint light from the cracks between floorboards. A particularly heavy tread paused directly above the pantry. Eleanor's heart hammered as she imagined the searcher, noticing the rug, the slight indentation of the trapdoor beneath. Her finger curled around the shotgun's trigger, sweat dampening her palms despite the cellar's chill. The footsteps moved on. Gradually, the sounds of the search diminished. The front door opened and closed, followed by Mrs. Carson's voice calling a strained farewell. Horse hooves receded down the drive, fading into silence. They remained motionless in the darkness, unwilling to trust too quickly. Minutes stretched endlessly before light appeared as the trapdoor lifted, revealing Mrs. Carson's worried face. "They're gone," she confirmed, "but I don't trust they'll stay gone." No, they emerged from the cellar, muscles stiff from tension. Mrs. Carson's kitchen showed signs of the search, chairs slightly out of alignment, a drawer not fully closed, curtains disturbed. "What did they want?" Nathan asked. "Claimed they were looking for fugitives," Mrs. Carson replied, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "Said several dangerous criminals had escaped justice in Silver Creek and might seek shelter in outlying farms." "Criminals?" Eleanor repeated incredulously. "They destroy a town and have the audacity to call survivors criminals? It's smart strategy," Nathan noted grimly. "Makes the town see us as threats rather than victims. Isolates us." Mrs. Carson nodded. That sheriff's deputy with them tried. To make it sound official, showed a paper with descriptions. Descriptions? Eleanor felt a chill. "A blacksmith from Silver Creek," Mrs. Carson recited, looking at Nathan. "A Boston woman recently arrived on the stage, and an elderly female with medical knowledge." The specificity was terrifying. Not just random survivors, but them specifically. Somehow, Rawlins had identified them as particular threats. "They know who we are," Mabel said, voicing everyone's realization. "They know we survived." "But why focus on us?" Eleanor wondered. "Dozens escaped Silver Creek." Nathan's expression darkened with understanding. "Because we saw something. Or they think we did." Before anyone could respond, Thomas returned from checking the property's perimeter. "They posted a watcher on the road," he reported, trying to be subtle about it, "but he's there." "Expecting us to make a run for it," Nathan concluded, "or waiting for someone to arrive." "The Reverend," Mrs. Carson gasped. "He's still coming after dark." The complication created a new urgency. If Reverend Holloway approached openly, he would lead Rawlins' men directly to them. If he was caught speaking with known fugitives, his own position in town would be compromised. "We need to warn him," Eleanor said, "before he reaches the farm." "I'll go," Thomas volunteered immediately. "I know every back trail on this property. Can circle around, intercept him before he passes the watcher." Nathan considered, then nodded. "Be careful. If they're hunting us this specifically, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone helping us." Thomas's expression hardened. "Been dealing with men like these my whole life, just wearing different badges or uniforms. I know how to stay invisible." He slipped out through the kitchen door, melting into the darkness with practiced ease. The remaining four settled in to wait, nerves stretched taut, every sound from outside amplified by their heightened awareness. "Why would they want you specifically?" Mrs. Carson asked, breaking the tense silence. "What makes you three different from other survivors?" Eleanor looked to Nathan, the same question in her eyes. What had they seen that others hadn't? What made them particular targets? "The manner of the attack," Nathan said slowly, thinking aloud. "Most who escaped weren't in town when it happened, didn't see how organized it was. But we did. And Jacob understood what it meant. An empire," Eleanor recalled Jacob's dying words. "He said Rawlins is building an empire." "Perhaps there's more," Mabel suggested, "something we saw without realizing its importance." Eleanor closed her eyes, forcing herself to revisit the horrific memories of Silver Creek's destruction, the smoke, the distant figures methodically destroying the town, the careful search afterward for survivors. "They weren't just destroying," she said suddenly, opening her eyes. "They were taking things, loading wagons." Nathan nodded, the observation triggering his own memory. Not just random looting, specific buildings, the assay office, land records. Office. "Documents," Eleanor breathed. "Deeds, claims, property records." The realization clarified Rawlins' strategy with chilling clarity. By destroying records of ownership while eliminating witnesses, he could effectively erase legitimate claims to valuable properties. In a territory where formal government was still taking shape, possession often constituted the strongest right. "He's not just terrorizing," Nathan said grimly. "He's acquiring, legally after a fashion, once the original owners are gone or discredited. And we're the ones who might understand and expose the scheme," Eleanor concluded. The sound of the back door opening silenced their discussion. Thomas entered, followed by a slender man in clerical clothing. Reverend Holloway, his kind face lined with concern. "Nathan," he said with evident relief, "thank God you survived." His gaze moved to the others. "Mrs. Whitaker, and you must be Miss Mitchell." Eleanor nodded, struck by the strangeness of being recognized by a man she'd never met. "Thomas Wilkins wrote about me." "Often and fondly," the Reverend confirmed, sorrow touching his expression. "I'm deeply sorry for what awaited you at Silver Creek." Mrs. Carson served coffee while the Reverend settled at the table. Despite his gentle demeanor, Eleanor sensed steel beneath the surface, a man whose faith hadn't blinded him to worldly dangers. "The situation in town grows more concerning by the hour," he reported without preamble. "Sheriff Bryce has effectively ceded control to his new deputies. Mayor Griffith seems either oblivious or complicit." "Complicit?" Nathan asked sharply. "He's suddenly flush with cash," Reverend Holloway explained, "buying property, settling old debts, money that appeared suspiciously soon after Silver Creek's destruction." "Bribed," Mabel said flatly. "Or threatened," the Reverend added. "Either way, he's allowing Juniper Ridge to be slowly occupied rather than defended." Eleanor leaned forward. "What about the Silver Creek survivors? Surely they're warning people." "Some try," Reverend Holloway acknowledged, "but they're being systematically discredited. Sheriff's men spread rumors that they're exaggerating for sympathy or charity, and those who speak most forcefully have suffered accidents or decided to suddenly leave town." The methodical nature of the takeover was horrifying in its efficiency, not a violent assault like Silver Creek, but a subtle infiltration that would achieve the same result without alarming neighboring communities. "How many in town would stand against this if they understood what was happening?" Nathan asked. "Perhaps half," the Reverend estimated. "More if properly led and convinced of the danger." "And weapons," Nathan pressed. "The usual frontier assortment, hunting rifles, shotguns, pistols, nothing organized." Eleanor listened to this assessment of Juniper Ridge's defensive capabilities with newfound strategic awareness. She found herself analyzing angles of fire, defensive positions, escape routes, considerations that would have been utterly foreign to her Boston self. "Jacob Brennan's wife," she said suddenly. "Sarah, is she safe?" The Reverend's expression softened. "She's staying with my family, a strong woman, though devastated by uncertainty about Jacob's fate." "He died honorably," Nathan said quietly. "Warned us with his last breath about Rawlins' plans." Reverend Holloway bowed his head briefly. "I'll tell her when the time is right. For now, what do you propose? You can't stay here indefinitely with Rawlins' men watching the farm." "We need to reach people in town," Eleanor said firmly. "Those who will listen. Organize them before it's too late." "Easier said than done," Thomas pointed out. "Town's being watched. You three are specifically being hunted." Silence fell as they contemplated this fundamental challenge. How to warn a town already partially under enemy control, with their every movement potentially observed. "What if they found us?" Eleanor suggested, the beginnings of a plan forming. "Not here, but somewhere we choose, somewhere that would draw attention, create a public confrontation." Nathan studied her with narrowed eyes. "You're suggesting using ourselves as bait." "I'm suggesting forcing Rawlins' men to show their hand publicly," Eleanor clarified. "Right now they're operating in shadows, making the danger seem distant or exaggerated. What if we made it immediate and visible?" "The church," Reverend Holloway said slowly, catching her intent. "Sunday service. The entire town will be present, including the mayor and sheriff. And if Rawlins' deputies attempt to arrest or harm known Silver Creek survivors during a church service?" Eleanor left the implication hanging. "Even those inclined to doubt would have to acknowledge something." "Is wrong," Nathan finished, admiration warming his voice. "It was audacious, dangerous, and profoundly risky. Exactly the kind of plan that might work when conventional approaches would fail." They spent the next hour refining details, identifying potential allies in town, planning contingencies. "I'll speak with those I trust implicitly," Reverend Holloway promised as they concluded. "Prepare them without revealing your specific plan. Sunday is 2 days away. We must move carefully until then." "And Sarah Brennan?" Eleanor asked. "I'll bring her here tomorrow night, if you wish to speak with her directly about Jacob." Nathan nodded. "She deserves to hear it from those who were with him." After the Reverend departed, again using Thomas's guidance to avoid the watcher on the road, the household settled into uneasy vigilance. Thomas took first watch from the barn loft, which offered a commanding view of the approaching roads. Nathan insisted on sharing the duty, despite Mrs. Carson's protests that he needed rest. Eleanor found herself unable to sleep, despite the comfort of a real bed after days of rough camping. Her mind raced with their planned confrontation, examining every potential flaw, every risk. The lives of everyone in Juniper Ridge might depend on their actions, a responsibility that pressed on her with physical weight. She rose eventually, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the night's chill. Downstairs, the kitchen was dark, except for banked embers in the stove. Eleanor added a small log, coaxing the fire back to life for tea. "Can't sleep either." Mabel's voice came from the shadows of the sitting room doorway. Eleanor shook her head. "Too much thinking. Makes two of us." The older woman joined her at the stove, her weathered hands extended toward the growing warmth. "This plan of yours is bold, dangerous. You disapprove?" Eleanor asked, testing the water in the kettle before setting it to heat. "Didn't say that." Mabel's eyes reflected the stove's glow. "Just observing the woman you've become isn't the one who stepped off that stagecoach." The simple truth of the statement resonated deeply. I hardly recognize myself sometimes, Eleanor admitted. The things I've done, the decisions I've made. Necessity reveals character, doesn't create it, Mabel said with quiet certainty. This woman was always in you, waiting for circumstances to call her forth. Eleanor considered this as she prepared tea for them both. Perhaps Mabel was right. Perhaps the proper Boston schoolteacher had merely been a role she'd played, constrained by society's expectations rather than her own nature. "Do you ever wonder about the life you might have had?" she asked, passing Mabel a steaming cup. "If Silver Creek hadn't been destroyed, if Thomas Wilkins had met me at the stage as planned." Mabel sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Every life has its forks in the road, child. Wondering about paths not taken is natural, but rarely useful." "I would have been his wife," Eleanor mused, more to herself than Mabel. "Keeping his books, managing his household, eventually bearing his children. A life I thought I wanted. And now?" The question hung between them. Demanding honesty, Eleanor was only beginning to acknowledge to herself. "Now I can't imagine returning to a life that small. As terrible as these days have been, they've shown me capacities I never knew I possessed." And a man who recognizes those capacities went the unspoken addition. Nathan Cooper had seen her strength from the beginning, had never treated her as fragile or incapable, despite her city background. "Life rarely gives us what we expect," Mabel said, paternal wisdom in her tone, "but sometimes it gives us what we need instead." The kitchen door opened quietly, admitting Nathan from his watch shift. He paused at finding them awake, something unreadable passing across his face as he looked at Eleanor in the stove's warm light. "Everything quiet?" she asked, already moving to pour a third cup of tea. "For now." He accepted the cup gratefully, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. "Thomas is still on watch. No movement from our roadside friend." Mabel observed their interaction with knowing eyes before rising from her chair with a theatrical yawn. "These old bones need horizontal rest, even if sleep won't come. Don't stay up all night plotting revolutions, you two." Her departure left a charged silence in the kitchen. Eleanor busied herself adding wood to the stove, overly conscious of Nathan's presence behind her, of the unusual privacy afforded by the sleeping household. "Your plan for Sunday," he said finally. "It's good, risky but good." She turned, warmed by the simple approval. "We need the town to see the threat clearly. Nothing else would cut through the doubt and dismissal quickly enough." Nathan nodded, studying her over the rim of his cup. "You've come a long way from that woman standing shocked beside her trunks. You noticed me even then?" The question slipped out before she could censure it. Hard not to. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You looked like a painting suddenly placed in a burning building, beautiful and completely out of place." The unexpected compliment flustered her more than any amount of frontier danger. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Everything I'd planned, everyone I'd hoped to meet, gone in an instant." "Yet you didn't collapse, didn't become hysterical." His respect was evident. "You assessed the situation and adapted." "I had little choice." "We always have choices," Nathan countered, "even if they're only in how we face what can't be changed." The observation struck Eleanor as profound in its simplicity. Her journey west had been filled with moments where control was wrested from her, yet her responses had always remained her own. "What will you do when this is over?" she asked. "If we succeed in warning Juniper Ridge, in stopping Rawlins?" Nathan stared into his cup, the question clearly one he'd avoided contemplating. "Rebuild, I suppose. Find another town needing a blacksmith." His eyes lifted to hers. "What about you? Return east?" The idea felt foreign now, almost laughable. "No," she said with certainty. "I came west for a reason. That reason remains, even if the specific circumstances have changed." "What reason?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. "To build something that was truly mine," Eleanor answered, echoing his own words from days earlier. "To breathe without constraint." Understanding passed between them, recognition of shared values beneath their different origins. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might say more, might bridge the narrow distance separating them in the quiet kitchen. A sharp knock at the window shattered the moment. Thomas's face appeared briefly, gesturing urgently. Nathan was instantly alert, setting down his cup and reaching for his rifle in one fluid movement. "Trouble?" Eleanor asked, already moving toward where Mabel's shotgun rested. "Multiple riders approaching," Nathan confirmed, peering through the curtain. "At least 6, moving fast." The peaceful interlude evaporated, replaced by the now familiar clarity of imminent danger. Eleanor checked the shotgun methodically, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Cellar again?" she asked. Nathan shook his head. "Too many this time, and they're moving with purpose. They know we're here." He made a swift decision. "We need to leave. Now, before they surround the farm." Eleanor ran to wake Mabel while Nathan conferred with Thomas at the back door. Mrs. Carson appeared in her nightdress, face lined with sleep, but eyes sharp with understanding as she assessed the situation. "The tunnel from the root cellar," she said immediately. "It'll take you to the barn. Thomas can guide you from there through the north pasture." "They'll know you helped us," Eleanor protested. Mrs. Carson waved away the concern. "I'll claim—" "You threatened me. Been rehearsing my terrified victim performance since you arrived." The older woman's courage was humbling. Eleanor clasped her hands briefly. "Thank you for everything." "Just stop these vermin before they take another town," Mrs. Carson replied fiercely. "That's thanks enough." They descended into the root cellar as pounding began at the front door. Nathan led with his rifle. Eleanor followed, supporting Mabel, with Thomas bringing up the rear. The farmhand carried a lantern shielded to provide minimal light, just enough to navigate the narrow earthen tunnel. The passage was longer than Eleanor had anticipated, forcing them to crouch as they moved through the constricted space. Behind them, muffled shouts indicated the search of the farmhouse had begun. Mrs. Carson's distressed voice carried faintly, her performance apparently convincing. The tunnel emerged in a corner of the barn's foundation, hidden behind stacked hay bales. Thomas moved these aside to reveal the spacious interior, dimly visible in moonlight filtering through high windows. "Horses?" Nathan asked tersely. Thomas nodded toward 3 animals already saddled in their stalls. "Been ready since the Reverend left. Figured this might happen." His foresight earned a grateful nod from Nathan, who helped Mabel mount the gentlest of the 3 horses. Eleanor required no assistance, drawing on childhood riding lessons that suddenly seemed providential rather than merely proper. "North pasture leads to Wilson's Creek," Thomas explained, checking the barn doors. "Follow it east until you hit the old logging road. That'll take you to the backside of town, away from the main approaches they're watching." "You're not coming?" Eleanor asked, surprised. Thomas shook his head. "Someone needs to back up Mrs. Carson's story, make sure she's safe." His expression hardened. "Besides, I'll be more useful in town, watching and listening. The Reverend knows to trust me." Nathan clasped the younger man's shoulder in silent gratitude. "Sunday morning," he confirmed. "The church will be ready," Thomas promised. Shouts from the house grew louder, the search expanding toward the outbuildings. Thomas opened the rear barn door, checking the pasture beyond before signaling them forward. "Godspeed," he whispered as they rode past. The north pasture stretched before them, bathed in moonlight that felt simultaneously revealing and concealing. They rode at a measured pace, aware that galloping horses would draw attention while stillness might escape notice. Eleanor glanced back once to see Thomas closing the barn door, already rearranging implements to hide their exit. Ahead, Nathan led confidently toward a line of trees marking Wilson's Creek. Behind them, lanterns appeared around the farmhouse, moving toward the barn. Shouts carried clearly through the night air, angry commands, the beginning of pursuit. "They've found our trail," Eleanor said, keeping her voice low despite the distance. Nathan nodded grimly. "We need to reach the trees before they organize properly." He increased their pace slightly, balancing the need for speed against the risk of noise. They reached the creek's edge as the first shots rang out behind them, bullets falling well short but signaling that they'd been spotted. The water gleamed silver in the moonlight, shallow enough to ford, but deep enough to potentially mask their trail. "Downstream," Nathan directed, guiding his horse into the water. "The current will hide our tracks." Eleanor followed, Mabel between them, the horses picking their way carefully through the rocky creek bed. The water muffled their movements, but also slowed their progress considerably. Behind them, riders had reached the pasture's edge, fanning out as they searched. "They'll find where we entered the water," Eleanor noted with mounting concern. "Yes." Nathan's response was clipped. "But they'll have to guess which direction we took. That buys time." They traveled nearly half a mile downstream before Nathan led them out on the eastern bank, where a stand of pine trees offered deeper shadow. The old logging road appeared as promised, little more than twin ruts overgrown with weeds, but navigable on horseback. "How far to town?" Mabel asked, her voice strained with the exertion of riding after so many days of hard travel. 3 miles, maybe 4, Nathan estimated. "We should reach it before dawn." The prospect of entering Juniper Ridge in darkness carried both advantage and risk. Less chance of being observed, but greater danger if they encountered patrols in the unfamiliar streets. They rode in tense silence, ears straining for sounds of pursuit. Occasionally, distant shouts carried on the night breeze, but the pursuing riders seemed to have lost their trail temporarily. "Where will we shelter in town?" Eleanor asked, as the first faint outline of buildings appeared ahead. "Reverend mentioned an abandoned tannery on the eastern edge," Nathan replied. "Said it would serve if we needed emergency shelter. No one uses it because of the smell, but it has multiple exits and a cellar." The irony of repeatedly hiding underground was not lost on Eleanor. From the mine office root cellar to the tannery basement, their journey had become one of emerging only to submerge again, like swimmers desperately seeking air before the next dive. Juniper Ridge materialized gradually through the pre-dawn gloom, a collection of wooden structures larger than Silver Creek had been, with several brick buildings marking its greater prosperity. They approached cautiously, staying within the tree line until they reached the eastern outskirts. The tannery stood apart from other buildings, its weathered structure sagging slightly, windows boarded against vandals. A faded sign hung crookedly above the main entrance, the once proud lettering now barely legible. Nathan dismounted, securing his horse in a small copse behind the building before helping Mabel down. Eleanor handled her own dismount, legs stiff from the ride but steady beneath her. "We'll need to hide the horses properly once we've checked inside," Nathan said. "Too valuable to leave exposed." The tannery's rear entrance yielded to Nathan's careful pressure, hinges protesting softly as the door swung inward. The interior smelled strongly of the chemicals once used to treat hides, the odor lingering years after operations had ceased. "Charming," Mabel muttered, covering her nose with a handkerchief. Nathan located a trapdoor leading to the cellar, descending first to ensure it was safe before calling the women down. The underground space proved surprisingly dry and well constructed, with small windows at ground level providing minimal light and ventilation. "Not comfortable," Nathan acknowledged, "but defensible and hidden." Eleanor helped Mabel settle on some abandoned burlap sacks while Nathan returned upstairs to properly conceal their horses. The older woman's face showed the strain of their hasty flight and midnight ride, yet her spirit remained undiminished. "I'm slowing you two down," she observed with characteristic directness. "Don't start that again," Eleanor chided gently. "We stay together." Mabel patted her hand. "Noble sentiment, child, but practical matters sometimes demand practical decisions." Her gaze was steady. "This Sunday plan of yours, it needs people who can move quickly, react instantly." "We'll manage," Eleanor insisted, though the concern had already occurred to her. "Maybe so," Mabel conceded, "but remember what I said about choices in how we face what can't be changed. I'm choosing to be sensible about my limitations." Further discussion was interrupted by Nathan's return. He carried a small sack of provisions, bread, dried meat, a canteen of water, evidently recovered from their saddlebags. "Horses are hidden in an old storage shed," he reported. "Found some feed, enough for a day or two." "And our pursuers?" Eleanor asked. "No sign yet, but they'll reach town eventually." Nathan distributed the meager provisions. "We should rest while we can. Sunday's approach will require planning." Urson. They ate sparingly, conserving supplies that would need to last until their confrontation at the church service. Afterward, Nathan insisted on taking first watch, despite having been awake through most of the night. "I'll wake you in 4 hours," he told Eleanor, repeating her own arrangement from Mrs. Carson's kitchen. This time, she didn't argue, recognizing the sense in sharing vigilance. She settled near Mabel on the makeshift bedding, her body's exhaustion finally overcoming her racing mind. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was of Nathan, silhouetted against the faint light from the cellar's small windows, standing watch over them both, a guardian carved from the harsh landscape that had forged them all anew. Dawn broke over Juniper Ridge with deceptive serenity, golden light washing across wooden facades and dusty streets. From their cellar vantage point, Eleanor watched the town awaken through ground-level windows, shopkeepers opening for business, early risers heading to the cafe, a stagecoach arriving with fresh passengers and mail. So normal, so unsuspecting of the poison gradually seeping through its veins. Nathan joined her at the window, his shoulder brushing hers in the confined space. "See anything concerning?" "2 men at the corner," she replied quietly. "They've been watching the stagecoach passengers for nearly an hour. Not deputies, at least not wearing badges, but they carry themselves like Rawlins' men." He nodded, impressed by her observation. In just a week, she'd learned to recognize the subtle indicators of threat, the too casual posture that concealed readiness, the hands that never strayed far from weapons, the eyes that assessed rather than merely saw. "Reverend Holloway should arrive soon," Nathan said, checking his pocket watch, a battered silver piece that had somehow survived their journey. "If he got our message." Thomas had slipped into town at first light, finding a street urchin to deliver a cryptic note to. The church rectory. The message contained nothing that would endanger the Reverend if intercepted, merely a request to check on Eastern business prospects, a reference to their location that Holloway would understand. Mabel stirred from her resting place, her face drawn with fatigue, but eyes clear and determined. "What day is it?" she asked. "Saturday," Eleanor answered. "1 day until our church appearance." The older woman nodded, adjusting her position with a poorly concealed wince. The midnight ride had taken a toll on her already taxed body, though she refused to acknowledge it directly. "We need information," Nathan said, returning to their planning. "Current conditions in town, which deputies are Rawlins' men, who can be trusted. And a better sense of the church layout," Eleanor added. "Entrances, exits, places for potential allies. Their strategy depended on precise timing and positioning. They would enter during the service, when the town was gathered, and Rawlins' men couldn't simply gun them down without witnesses. Eleanor would speak, revealing what they'd witnessed at Silver Creek and warning of Juniper Ridge's imminent danger. If Rawlins' men attempted to silence them, their true nature would be exposed to the entire community at once. It was audacious, desperate, and their best hope of galvanizing enough resistance to prevent another massacre. A soft knock at the cellar's exterior entrance interrupted their planning. Nathan moved instantly to the door, rifle ready, while Eleanor positioned herself with the shotgun covering his flank. Their coordination was wordless now, born of shared danger and growing trust. "Eastern light brings clarity," came a hushed voice, the recognition phrase they'd included in their message. Nathan relaxed marginally, though the rifle remained ready as he opened the door. Reverend Holloway entered quickly, followed by a woman in a dark dress, her face partially concealed by a bonnet. "Nathan," the Reverend greeted with evident relief. "Miss Mitchell, Mrs. Whitaker." His eyes conveyed both concern and determination. "I've brought someone who insisted on coming, despite the risk." The woman removed her bonnet, revealing a face marked by grief, yet possessed of undeniable strength. Dark hair pulled back in a practical, not-framed features that might once have been described as pretty, but now carried the weight of recent tragedy. "Sarah Brennan," she said simply, her gaze moving between them before settling on Eleanor. "You were with my husband at the end." Eleanor stepped forward, taking the woman's hands in hers. "We were. He saved our lives, Mrs. Brennan." "Sarah, please." Her voice was steady, despite the pain evident in her eyes. "I need to know how he died." They settled on the limited seating available, crates and sacks arranged in a rough circle. Nathan described Jacob's final days with respectful honesty, neither diminishing his suffering nor exaggerating his heroism. The truth needed no embellishment. "He spoke of you at the end," Eleanor added gently. "Asked us to tell you he tried to get back." Sarah nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek before she brushed it away with resolute fingers. "That sounds like Jacob, always thinking of home." "He also warned us about Rawlins," Nathan continued, "about his plans for this territory, about men already inside Juniper Ridge." "I believe it," Sarah said, anger briefly overtaking grief. "Things have changed here, even in the few days I've been present. New men appearing with unexplained authority, strange accidents befalling those who ask questions." Reverend Holloway cleared his throat. "The situation deteriorates by the hour. Sheriff Bryce has effectively surrendered control to his new deputies. 3 more Silver Creek refugees have disappeared after speaking too openly." "And the mayor?" Eleanor asked. "Increasingly nervous," the Reverend reported. "I suspect he's realized he's made a deal with the devil but sees no way out." "What about our plan?" Nathan pressed. "Sunday service?" Reverend Holloway nodded. "I've spoken privately with those I trust absolutely, perhaps 20 men and women who will support you when the moment comes." His expression grew troubled. "But Rawlins' men will be present too. The sheriff has ordered his deputies to attend all public gatherings." "Looking for us," Eleanor surmised. "Exactly. And they'll be armed in the house of God." The Reverend's disapproval was evident. Sarah leaned forward intently. "I want to help. For Jacob." "It will be dangerous," Nathan warned. "Once we show ourselves, Rawlins' men might abandon subtlety." "Entirely. I buried an empty coffin yesterday," Sarah replied, steel in her voice. "Danger means little after that." They spent the next hour refining their plan, with Sarah and the Reverend providing crucial details about the church layout, the positioning of deputies during services, and potential allies among the congregation. "The choir loft overlooks the entire sanctuary," Reverend Holloway explained, sketching the layout on a scrap of paper. "Usually empty during the service itself, but it offers a commanding position." "And the side door?" Nathan asked. "Leads directly to my study, then outside, always unlocked during services." Eleanor committed every detail to memory, visualizing their movements, anticipating reactions. What had once been foreign to her, tactical thinking, strategic planning, now felt like second nature. "I need to return before my absence is noticed," the Reverend said finally. "The church opens at 9 tomorrow. Service begins at 10. "We'll be there," Nathan assured him. Ready or not. After the Reverend departed, Sarah remained, her determination to help evident in every line of her posture. "I can bring clean clothes," she offered, eyeing their travel-worn attire. "Food, perhaps weapons." "All would be welcome, Eleanor." "Acknowledged, but your presence here risks exposure." Sarah's smile held no humor. "I'm already watched as a Silver Creek refugee. My movements raise no new suspicions." Her gaze shifted to Mabel. "But you, Mrs. Whitaker, you shouldn't be part of tomorrow's confrontation." The directness startled Eleanor, though it merely confirmed her own unspoken concern. Mabel had grown increasingly frail over the past day, her remarkable resilience finally reaching its limits. "Been thinking the same," Mabel admitted with uncharacteristic quietness. "These old bones have traveled as far as they can." "You could stay with me tonight," Sarah suggested. "My boarding house room is small but private. You'd be safe there, while they handle tomorrow's business." Mabel looked to Eleanor and Nathan, a question in her eyes despite her independent nature. They had come so far together, survived so much as a unit, that separation felt like surrender. "It makes sense," Nathan said gently. "We'll need to move quickly tomorrow, react instantly." Eleanor nodded reluctant agreement. "We'd be better focused knowing you're safe." "Well, when you put it like that, you make an old woman feel positively burdensome," Mabel huffed, but her eyes held understanding rather than offense. "Fine then. I'll leave the heroics to you young folks." The decision made, Sarah helped Mabel prepare for departure, arranging her bonnet to partially obscure her face. They would leave separately, Sarah first, then Mabel following at a distance, to the boarding house. "I'll return at dusk," Sarah promised, "with everything you need for tomorrow." Watching them leave, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. Mabel's absence from tomorrow's confrontation was tactically sound but emotionally difficult. They had become a unit, these survivors of Silver Creek's destruction. "She'll be safer with Sarah," Nathan said, reading her thoughts with uncanny accuracy. "I know." Eleanor sighed, turning from the window. "It's the right decision, but still feels wrong." He nodded, understanding. Bonds formed in survival run deep. The simple statement captured their shared experience perfectly. What they had endured together created connections that defied conventional relationships. Eleanor, Nathan, and Mabel had become something beyond friends or even family, forged through fire into something without easy definition. The day passed with agonizing slowness. They reviewed their plan repeatedly, adjusting details, anticipating complications. Nathan cleaned their weapons with methodical care, while Eleanor practiced drawing the pistol from beneath the skirts Sarah would bring. By dusk, when Sarah returned as promised, they had refined their strategy to its essence, simple enough to adapt when circumstances inevitably changed, detailed enough to provide structure. "Mabel's settled safely," Sarah reported, depositing a bundle on one of the crates, complaining about the accommodations, but comfortable enough. The bundle contained clean clothes approximating their sizes, additional ammunition, preserved food, and, most precious, information. Sarah had spent the day gathering intelligence about deputy positions, church attendance patterns, and town attitudes. "The church will be full," she confirmed. "Mayor's wife has organized a special collection for Silver Creek victims, though I doubt much will actually reach survivors." Perfect timing, Eleanor noted. We can expose the charitable fraud along with the larger conspiracy. So, they ate a proper meal from Sarah's provisions, then prepared for a night of fitful rest before the morning's confrontation. Sarah departed with promises to return an hour before the service, bringing final reports on deputy deployments. Left, alone in the cellar, Eleanor and Nathan settled into watchful silence. The coming dawn would bring either salvation for Juniper Ridge or disaster for them all. The weight of responsibility pressed down, making rest elusive despite their exhaustion. "Do you think it will work?" Eleanor asked finally, voicing the doubt she'd kept contained all day. Nathan considered before answering, his honesty one of the qualities she'd come to value most. "It might. Depends how deeply Rawlins has corrupted the town, how many still retain the courage to stand against tyranny. And if it fails..." His eyes met hers in the lantern's dim light. "Then we'll have died trying to prevent another Silver Creek. That counts for something." The simplicity of his response struck Eleanor profoundly. Not empty reassurance, not blind optimism, but the core truth that had guided them both. Action in the face of evil was its own victory, regardless of outcome. "It counts for everything," she agreed softly. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier dissolving, a recognition deepening. Without conscious decision, Eleanor found herself moving closer, drawn by the gravity of shared purpose and unspoken feeling. Nathan remained still, watching her approach with an intensity that made her heart quicken. When she finally sat beside him, shoulders touching, the contact felt simultaneously new and familiar. "I never expected this," she confessed, "any of it." "The danger?" he asked, though his tone suggested he understood her meaning went deeper. "The clarity," Eleanor corrected, "about what matters, who matters." His hand found hers in the shadows, calloused fingers, intertwining with her own increasingly weathered ones. Neither spoke for several moments, the simple contact expressing what words might have complicated. "If tomorrow goes well," Nathan said finally, "what then?" The question contained multitudes, practical considerations about their futures, deeper inquiries about what had grown between them, possibilities neither had allowed themselves to articulate during their desperate flight. "Then we build something," Eleanor answered, echoing their shared ambition from days earlier, "something that's ours." Nathan's fingers tightened around hers, his only response, but all that was needed. They sat together in the quiet cellar, connected by more than touch, while Juniper Ridge continued its oblivious routines above. Morning arrived with somber purpose. They dressed in the clean clothes Sarah had provided, a simple dress for Eleanor, dark trousers, and shirt for Nathan. Their weapons remained concealed but accessible, final preparations made with few words needed. Sarah arrived as promised, bringing news that increased their urgency. "More of Rawlins' men rode in at dawn," she reported. "At least 10, claiming to be cattlemen, but armed like soldiers. They've spread through town, positioned at key locations. He's accelerating his timeline," Nathan concluded grimly. "Probably realized we reached Juniper Ridge." "The church is still our best option," Eleanor insisted. "The entire town gathered, witnesses to whatever happens." They left the tannery separately, approaching the church through different routes to avoid attention. The building stood at the town's center, its white steeple rising above surrounding structures like a declaration of permanence. Eleanor entered last, slipping through the main doors as the bell tolled 10. The sanctuary was indeed filled to capacity, townsfolk in Sunday finery creating a deceptive scene of normalcy. She spotted Nathan already positioned near the side. Exit, Sarah in a pew midway down the right side. More concerning were the deputies stationed at each entrance, their badges gleaming in the light filtering through stained glass windows. Not all were Rawlins' men, Eleanor knew, but enough to create serious danger when they made their move. Reverend Holloway began the service with practiced composure, though Eleanor detected tension beneath his measured tones. The congregation sang a hymn, its verses about deliverance carrying unintended significance, given what was about to unfold. As the music ended and the Reverend moved to begin his sermon, Eleanor caught Nathan's slight nod. The moment had arrived. She stepped into the center aisle, removing her bonnet to reveal her face clearly. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell," she announced, her teacher's voice carrying to every corner of the surprise sanctuary. "I arrived at Silver Creek 1 week ago to marry Thomas Wilkins." Gasps and murmurs erupted as recognition spread. The deputies straightened, hands moving toward weapons, but hesitating with so many witnesses present. "Silver Creek no longer exists," Eleanor continued with unwavering clarity. "It was destroyed by Jedediah Rawlins and his men, who murdered its citizens and stole its wealth." The mayor rose from his front row seat, face flushed. "This is inappropriate. Sheriff, remove this woman." "Those same men are now here," Eleanor pressed on, ignoring the interruption. "In your town, wearing deputies' badges, preparing to take Juniper Ridge just as they took Silver Creek." The sanctuary erupted in confused shouts. Nathan moved to Eleanor's side, rifle now visible in his hands. "The woman speaks truth," he declared. "I am Nathan Cooper, blacksmith of Silver Creek. We witnessed the massacre and have come to warn you before history repeats itself." "Lies!" The sheriff stood, pointing dramatically. "These are the fugitives. We've been hunting, criminals who burned Silver Creek themselves." Several deputies drew weapons, creating screams from nearby congregants, but others hesitated, looking uncertain, men of Juniper Ridge who recognized the inconsistency of the sheriff's claims. Reverend Holloway seized the moment, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Consider carefully what you're witnessing. Armed men threatening violence in God's house against people whose only crime is speaking." The sanctuary balanced on a knife's edge of potential violence when the main doors burst open. A bloodied Thomas staggered in, supported by Mrs. Carson. "Rawlins' army," he gasped, loud enough for all to hear. "Coming down the North Road. Dozens of riders, heavily armed." The announcement shattered remaining doubts. What Eleanor and Nathan had warned about was literally arriving at the town's doorstep. "We need to organize defense immediately," Nathan declared, taking command naturally. "Every man with a weapon to positions along Main Street. Women and children to the schoolhouse basement." To Eleanor's relief, townspeople began responding, moving with purpose rather than panic. The Reverend directed his trusted allies, men and women previously prepared for this moment. Only the corrupted deputies maintained opposition, the sheriff shouting ineffectually for order while his men looked increasingly uncertain. Mayor Griffith surprised everyone by stepping forward, his face ashen but resolute. "I made a terrible mistake," he announced, voice shaking. "Rawlins approached me weeks ago, offered protection and prosperity if I eased his men into town positions." He turned to Nathan. "I didn't know about Silver Creek. I swear it." Eleanor wasn't certain she believed him, but his public confession served their purpose, confirming everything they'd claimed. The revelation turned the remaining legitimate deputies against their corrupted colleagues, weapons now pointed at the sheriff and his questionable men. "Lock them in the jail," Nathan ordered. "We'll sort guilt later. Right now, we need every able hand on defense." The town galvanized with remarkable speed, men retrieving weapons from homes and businesses, women organizing supplies and medical stations. Eleanor found herself directing newcomers to defensive positions, her natural authority emerging without conscious thought. Sarah joined her, expression grimly determined. "For Jacob," she said simply, checking the revolver she'd somehow acquired. Outside, the church bell rang frantically, warning the entire town of approaching danger. Citizens who hadn't attended services emerged from homes and businesses, quickly incorporated into the defensive effort through an expanding network of messengers. Nathan found Eleanor amid the organized chaos, his expression reflecting both urgency and something deeper, more personal. "This isn't going to be pretty," he warned. "Rawlins won't expect organized resistance, but he's got numbers and experience." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. "Then we make every shot count." She reached for his hand, squeezing briefly. "Together." The word contained promises beyond the immediate crisis, commitments neither had voiced directly, but both now acknowledged with absolute clarity. "Together," Nathan agreed, and in his eyes Eleanor saw not just determination for the coming battle, but vision for the aftermath, for rebuilding, for creating something permanent from the ashes of what they'd lost. From down the street came shouts of warning. Riders appeared at the town's northern edge, sunlight glinting off weapons and determinative intent evident in their formation. Juniper Ridge prepared to make its stand, its citizens transformed from unsuspecting victims to united defenders through the courage of 3 survivors who journeyed through hell to deliver warning. As Eleanor took position behind a barricade, rifle steady in hands that no longer resembled those of a Boston schoolteacher, she felt something unexpected amid the tension of impending battle. She felt home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.